My own father and brother set fire to my flat. People who suddenly came into a lot of money.
Oh no, I'm gonna die!
$1,000 on a scratch-off that was given to me on my birthday by my aunt. It was just a $2 scratcher, and obviously nobody thought I would win that much. I scratched it in front of everyone and they were all super excited for me except my aunt, who demanded the ticket back because she paid for it. I even offered to split half with her. Long story short, she took me to small claims where the judge pretty much laughed and she didn't get anything. Haven't talked to her since. I unexpectedly inherited about 4 years worth of take-home pay. Before I knew how much it would be, I told my best friend I'd be getting a few $1,000s. She immediately asked me to take her on a trip to Europe. That was the biggest thing she asked for, but she made other small requests as well. When the money came through, and it was a lot more than I'd anticipated, I did not tell my friend. Instead, I started distancing myself from her. I also did not tell any of my other friends. I did tell my boyfriend. He did not ask for anything. I took him on a trip to Europe. My money came in the form of accidental death inheritance after my dad died in a motorcycle crash. His girlfriend at the time was furious that he left everything to me. She tried to convince me to give her money, and when I refused, she took everything, and I mean everything, from his house overnight. She rented 2 U-Hauls and her brother raided the place. Furniture, household supplies, food, clothes, everything was gone. By the time I got there, their only things left were a few t-shirts she left on the floor and a couple empty cans of soda on the kitchen counter. She even took things that held no monetary value, like a calendar I made my dad for Father's Day one year. It was just colorful cardboard and pictures of us I had glued together. She took it all. She started selling what she could on Facebook, mostly his woodworking tools and fishing gear, and she fled to somewhere in the next state over. We tried to get help from the police, but they didn't do much. She did a lot of other things that were bigger legal issues, I guess. For instance, she ran a fake GoFundMe claiming the funds were going to his funeral and managed to get over 10 grand from his coworkers, but I'm the one who paid for the services. Last I heard, they finally found her in some woodsy town, but I don't know what happened. It's honestly too emotional to deal with, and I've accepted the fact that she most likely destroyed or sold everything already anyway. It's been 2 years since this all happened. It's horribly sad, though. So a few years out of college, my girlfriend and I were living in a sort of large communal apartment with 5 other people, 2 bedrooms, 2 couches in the common area. I had just gotten a significant promotion at my job and that situation was exceptionally below my means, but my girlfriend was convinced that these were her people and they were all going to become great philosophy writers and poets by living together and sharing experiences. They were all unemployed or underemployed, and experienced moochers, so I was very careful not to let them know I was saving large sums of money with the intent of moving out soon, and taking my girlfriend with me, or not. One day the other couple had an argument about rent, and to try and keep them from coming to blows, my girlfriend promised them that I'd cover it for them and showed them one of my pay stubs, which I guess they showed everyone else. I got home from work and walked right into an apartment meeting ambush, where everyone else informed me that they wanted me to contribute more meaningfully and they'd put it to a vote before I got back. I told them that I was already paying for their food, that they kept guilting my girlfriend into buying for them, topping up the apartment emergency fund instead of stealing from it like the rest of them, and many other things, and that I wasn't going to cover other people's rent as well. The next day when I was at work, someone went into my room and destroyed my laptop, which was the only thing of value I owned at the time. I collected the few things I wanted to take, told my girlfriend I was breaking up with her, and walked out. I'm adopted, live in the USA, and an only child. I have an aunt that insists that because I'm not actually their child that I have no legal rights to my parents' estate, which is sizable. Go Dad. Little does she know, I stand to inherit it all per the family trust as sole beneficiary. My mother and her sisters haven't spoken in over a decade, and frankly my parents can't stand the rest of the family. I've seen them do some shady, underhanded dealings with each other when grandparents passed, and I'm preparing for war once my parents pass. It should be a short war. I once took second in a poker tournament and won $150,000. There was an audience of about 200 people when it finished. Common practice was people ask winners for a lucky chip. I was almost mobbed by people begging for lucky chips as I left the casino. Had to be escorted by security and paid a friend $300 to follow me in their car, and we drove all over town for 2 hours to make sure nobody was following me home. My grandma died a week before Christmas, and she left her house and 1/4 of her small fortune to me. The rest of the money went to my brother and my 2 cousins. My uncles and aunts have been a pain in my back ever since, claiming that the money and house are theirs, etc. And I've also been approached by people who I haven't seen or talked in a while. Even my ex, who dumped me for some douchebag rugby player, started talking to me again and inviting me to places, and she's still dating the same guy. Anyway, I'm not naive enough to lend those people money or befriend even. Luckily I have good friends and my brother as advisors. So when I started dating my boyfriend, I didn't know just how rich he was. We were both 25. By this point he had already made his insane fortune and was quietly investing it whilst working as a primary school teacher because he enjoys teaching and is very talented with kids. After about 8 months of dating, he finally opens up to me about his finances. He is an extremely modest person and uses his money almost exclusively for charity and investing in environmental technology. We had been planning on going to Malaysia and I was a bit stressed at how to budget my money for the trip. Anyways, long story short, he said it took time for him to tell me because he wanted to make sure I loved him for who he is, which was and still is true. Showed me his investments and private account statements, and I'm not going to lie, I got aroused looking at them. By the age of 24 he had basically broken the £100 million liquid worth mark, and it was still growing. After this we go on the best holiday of my life. I've grown up lower middle class my whole life, so suddenly flying in first class and living a 5-star life in Malaysia for about a month without a care in the world was something else. Anyways, as people do, we put pictures up on Instagram and Facebook. Suddenly I get bombarded by people saying since when did I get rich and if I had spare money laying around. My own aunt knocked on my door at 4 a.m. and slapped me in the face for lying about my money and tried to get her son to barge into my flat. Thankfully my boyfriend was there. He absolutely ruined them both. After this she went around telling all of my relatives I had been hiding my wealth and refused to pay for my little sister's treatment before she died. She passed before I met my boyfriend and the treatment likely wouldn't have worked. This hurt me a lot and for some reason my family took her side. I cut them off and about 2 weeks later someone set fire to my flat. My neighbor's kids ended up in hospital. Thanks to security cameras and an eyewitness, my own father and brother got jail time. I went from thinking about all the possibilities of the great stuff I could do for my family with the money to almost being killed by them and cutting them out within a few weeks. It sucks how money changes people. I inherited my beloved grandma's house alongside with some other properties. As the house and the properties are near a very rapidly developing city, prices have skyrocketed and lead to me inheriting about $1.5 million in value. That may sound awesome at first, but it truly isn't. The house is a very old brick house, built in the late 1700s, and the properties are so small and widely distributed I can't really sell them for a good price. As the house is a listed historical building, every little repair has to be done by state-approved professionals for restoration and conservation of old buildings, which basically doubles if not even triples the costs. I rented it out, but the rent I get is barely enough to cover the costs of repairs, insurance, etc. I am lucky if I get even by the end of the year. But as this house is where my family used to live for the last 4 generations before my dad bought the ranch and moved there with my mum, I want to keep it in the family as long as possible. Now, somehow, word has spread that I inherited a lot of money. I did my best to stop these rumors, but it didn't work out. I've never had many friends, but the ones I have are true quality friends. They will do everything for me and I will do everything for them. After I got the house and the rumors spread, I got invitations to dinner in some really fancy restaurants. I was invited to sport events, I don't even like sports, and some other very costly activities. All these came from people who claimed to be my friends. Needless to say, they expected me to pay for everything. You've got so much money, what do these $500 matter to you? I'll pay you back sometimes, etc. The common phrases I got to hear. The best one were, "You are way too young, 28 BTW, to have this kind of money, so just give it to us, you don't deserve to have so much money. You have never worked a day in your life. Been working at the power plant since I was an apprentice at 16, worked my way up to deputy manager and shift supervisor, while the guy this came from was unemployed as long as I can remember and lived from welfare. I have now learned who to trust and to spot telltale signs of vultures." So, I knew this girl who was a sex worker, had known her for years, and we had even briefly dated before she got into that line of work. She was always really open about what she was doing, and that she enjoyed it, which I believed because this woman was a freak, in a good way. In fact, one of the reasons things hadn't worked out was that she was way too kinky for me, and I'm pretty open-minded. She always explained it to me like this: I would be a total slut either way, so why not get paid for it and not have to work? Fair enough, I didn't question it. Fast forward like 10 years, and I had inherited a bunch of money. Not like obscenely wealthy, but enough to really change my lifestyle. And I still talk to my friend regularly, even though we live in different parts of the country. She was one of the few people who was there for me consistently through some really dark times, and I was there for her in the same way, and I really valued her friendship. She started talking about how she wasn't young anymore, and she wasn't happy anymore doing what she was doing and wanted to change directions. You probably can guess where this was going. She had a plan that seemed pretty good. I was also in the midst of intentionally drinking myself to death, and I was pretty sure I was going to die soon. I came very close, so I didn't really care about money. I ended up giving her $10,000 that she needed to go back to school, not a loan, just gave it to her. I don't know what she spent it on, drugs probably, but she didn't go back to school. She abruptly cut off contact with me, after 12 years, and that was that. Obviously I didn't die, although as I said I came extremely close. I still have money, so I'm not even mad about that. And she was legitimately a huge support in my life for a long time, when there was no expectation of her ever getting anything out of it, so I'm still grateful for that. I think her demons just got the best of her, and she's probably really ashamed or maybe even dead, but it was such a painful betrayal. Got a $7,000 settlement from a car accident. I accidentally left the check on the corner table in the living room. My dad walks into my bedroom and asks if I can lend my mom any money. I work minimum wage retail and ask him how much does she need. He says how about half of that $7,000 check. It has been almost 8 years. I haven't seen any of that money back. Not technically begging, but still a horror story in my opinion. When I was around the age of 15, I had a job. Of course, my mom helped out tremendously and got me involved in this career platform, but it took a lot of time and effort on both of our parts, so we quite the profit from it. All the money was deposited under my name though, so I could use it once I turned 18. Didn't know this until I actually turned 18, but a trusted family member who knew my account information went into my account and took a good portion of money. It was pretty messed up realizing that someone who had already done some pretty messed up stuff to me also felt comfortable enough basically stealing money from a child. Still upsets me to this day because I wish that money could have gone to my mom. She deserved it more than anyone. My family has been poor for generations, but while my father settled in a life of crass poverty and petty crimes, his brother, my uncle, worked hard and built a small fortune. My branch of the family is the begging one, with my uncle being made to give us money numerous times. Worst instance so far was my father pulling a gun on his own brother, in public and in my uncle's own company, to steal a few $1,000s. I fled that environment and I'm following in my uncle's footsteps. Me and my husband currently make more than the sum of the incomes of all of families living in my mother's apartment building. I eagerly await the day when my father threatens me with a gun to get money out of me. I'm a fairly average guy in my mid-20s who always wears the same $2 t-shirt and $5 jeans, but over the years it started to leak out that I had some money. After a combination of me buying a business in my very small hometown, a gossipy girl from school who saw me on Seeking Arrangement, and enough social media posts showing me constantly traveling in business class or whatever, and the fact I seem to do very little actual work. Then in the last year or so I've discovered a seemingly entire new branch of my family tree and a whole bunch of people from high school I don't remember ever saying more than a few words to, suddenly claiming me as their childhood best friends. I caught up with an old actual schoolmate who knew me well enough and we're having coffee and she asks, "Is it true you bought a plane?" And a few things like that were absolutely insane. The Chinese whispers in my town had apparently gone absolutely crazy, and I'm always uncomfortable running into someone when I'm back there, because everyone thinks I'm some crazy playboy millionaire when I spend most of my time in a blanket fort on the internet like everybody else. The extended family are the worst though, because they harass my mom, dad and grandmother who know nothing about my financial situation to borrow money. Many of these people I've never met in my life. People weren't begging, but we felt like they were jealous and envious and did not approve of our decisions. Basically my husband came into money because he had a number of severe permanent injuries from his prior job. So he got paid out a large sum and decided to stop working for a while. This was because we had been through some very serious illness, I was ill, and personal circumstances which messed us both up mentally, so we wanted to take the time to recover our mental health. And secondly, he needed to study to change careers because he was unable to work in his former career due to injuries. Many people, even our parents, disagree with him having even a few months off work to recuperate. This really hits me up the wall. And there have been so many people that don't think we deserve the money and are envious of the house we were able to buy with it. All throughout school I was a bit of a loser, didn't do well in class and never really cared. I used to go out all the time with my friends and would hang out with them all the time. After school I didn't do much other than waste time until I found my wife and wanted to start being better for her. I did a 1-year software development course and then got a pretty low-end job making almost nothing in my country, South Africa. When my wife got pregnant, all my friends basically ghosted me as I wasn't going to be going out partying with them anymore. They wouldn't return my texts or even answer my calls. A few years down the line I landed a very high-paying remote job, $200,000, for a SF-based company. The average salary for a software developer in South Africa is around $30,000 per year. My wife was very proud of me, I think, and posted a picture of me on her Facebook standing next to my new car that I had just bought. Not 20 minutes after she posted it I started getting messages from some of my old friends saying that it had been a while and they wanted to catch up and really missed me. There was one guy I always had a soft spot for and decided that I would go have dinner with him and see how the last 4 years of his life treated him. We hadn't even ordered our food yet when he dropped the bomb on me that he felt that I owed him a lot of money for always being there for me and that I would be selfish to not give him some money as I had so much. I quietly just got up and left. I eventually changed my number and deactivated my social media accounts, but people still harass my wife and mother to try and get some money out of me. This doesn't even go into the absolute BS I had coming from my dad's side of the family, who are basically hillbillies. Kind of the opposite for me. Parents became rich very quickly and we moved into a huge house. I was 16 at the time and didn't really notice people treating me any differently. A few years later, early 20s, I would mostly hang out with poor people. Was never fond of rich or posh crowd. A friend asked for £20 so he could buy some food, but he paid me back 2 weeks later. I would be very stingy with my money and people respected that. In return, I gave my friends the love and respect they deserved as human beings. In fact, people have been more generous to me over the years than I have been to them. Especially poorer people. I often wish I was a better person and did more for others. Slowly getting there. I'm 30 now. My mom has this ugly football-themed van. Ever since I was 10 we would go around in circles about how it will be mine one day, but I told her from the start I'll pass. I hate vans. And football. Bought a different car and the van broke down after she put over 300k miles on it. I get my first income tax, which was almost 3k, and she tries to sell me the van for 2k. I tell her no and she drops it to 1,000 since I can easily afford it. I still refuse, and less than an hour later she sends me a picture of a $1,200 dog for sale with "This is what I want for my birthday. He's in Kentucky, I'll send you the address." She wanted to use my money to get a dog and was hoping to be sneaky and trick me into buying a broken ugly van to fund her multi-state trip to pick up her dream dog. She didn't speak to me for months after, and still tries to sell me that paws for more than it was worth when it ran. At age 20 I was earning £24,000 in an IT job, which doesn't seem like much, but when all your friends are taking home £200 a week and you're pulling in 2k a month, it's a noticeable difference. I basically became a bank. Always lending money to people. Eventually I had to stop because I realized even though my friends were paying me back, I was essentially facilitating their overspending and they were trapped in a cycle of debt. Now I just get the beers and the weed in, invite everyone round and we have a blast. I know someone who has an uncle who once won $7 million or something like that in the national lottery, and his wife turned evil after that. They had never had any problems in their marriage before, but she flipped on a dime the second the money came into their lives. She was extremely greedy and wanted to control everything, spend thousands of dollars on designer bags, clothes, etc. without asking him first, never cared about his or the kids' well-being and only cared about the money. His life was pure hell right after he won. But luckily it made him realize what an evil person his wife really was so that he could get rid of her and move on with his life. As far as I heard, it all turned out well after they divorced. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Psychopath playlist. Share your own related story in the comments below. And if you get a lot of money, beware of the vultures. He was extremely good looking, but not to me, because I saw what he was under the skin. People related to a psychopath, what is your creepiest moment? My nephew, through marriage, is a crazy little shit. Once, the entire family was playing hide and seek. He was around 9. He didn't like where I hid, so he flew into a rage. He tried to hit me. I grabbed his wrist and twisted just enough to subdue him. He screamed like a freaking maniac. I released him. He then ran into another room stating he needed his Nerf gun to shoot me because he shoots people whenever he's mad. I looked at my sister-in-law and said, "Seriously, you're okay with this?" Her response was that his rage was my fault, I had no right to touch him, and that I should have just let him hit me since he's only a boy. I told her, quite firmly, that if her crazy little bastard ever even gave the appearance of causing harm to one of my children, that I would put him down like a rabid dog. Fortunately, I guess, her husband, my wife's parents and everyone else present told her that she was wrong, her kid was nuts, and that this was a serious red flag. Flash forward 2 years. Kid is still crazy, but that's everyone else's problem because he's still just a boy. I'm staying at their house. Things have mostly settled from that prior incident. I wake up very early every morning. So around 4:30, I find myself awake. I don't want to get up and wake up everyone else, so I just sort of lie there and meditate. At around 5:20, the door opens. Thinking it's my kids, who were young at the time and still came to get us early, I kind of just glance up. Then I notice that it's the nephew and he's holding what appears to be an AR-15. Now, I suffer from PTSD from Iraq. So my fight or flight response is triggered, my heart is pounding, and I'm basically in survival mode. I wait. I watch. He creeps past the foot of the bed, walks up to my side and raises this rifle up to point the muzzle at my face. So I figure, this is it. I'm going to die. Today it ends. The only goal I have for myself right now is to prevent him from harming my wife and kids. He raises it up and the muzzle is a few inches from my face. I reached up, I grabbed the muzzle and I pushed as hard as I could, sending the butt into the little psycho's face. His nose is bleeding, he's crying, he's screaming about how he's going to kill me, how I'm dead, etc. So now everyone is awake. Lights are flipped on and I see that it's a toy rifle made to look like an AR-15. Apparently, this little psycho was planning to stick the muzzle in my face and pull the trigger to scare the crap out of me with flashing lights and electronic gun sounds. I feel somewhat torn. On the one hand, I just broke an 11-year-old's nose for playing with a toy gun. On the other hand, the kid had all of these tells that he was dangerous and what he was doing was super creepy and yet another red flag. My sister-in-law was pissed. Her chosen narrative is that I'm a mentally unstable lunatic who is a danger to all children. She calls the cops. She insists, despite the protestations of my wife, that she's having me arrested and charged with child abuse for hitting a boy for playing with his toys. Police arrive. Interviews take basically the whole day. I'm a little worried that, getting arrested aside, I might not be able to leave this place and go home the next day as planned because these cops might not be done with their investigation. Fortunately, it didn't play out that way. See, this little we need to talk about Kevin Butthole wasn't just a crazy shit around me like in the movies. He was a crazy little shit everywhere and had been for years. The police had a file on him because the school was required to call the police every time he threatened a school shooting, which was often. I laid out my version of events much like I did here. I didn't see him and have a flashback thinking he was an insurgent. I saw him, I knew what he is going through his head, and I wanted to try to prevent him from killing my family. They did let me go home on schedule. And a week later the detective called me to let me know there would be no charges. He also told me that his interview with my nephew was chilling and he hopes that my sister-in-law pulls her head out of the sand and gets the kids some help. I told him she won't ever. And when he's 30 years old and on trial she'll be crying and saying he's just a boy. Hopefully he doesn't hurt anyone, but I know the odds are stacked against that hope. Before anyone asks, I refuse to stay at their house. If we are in town, we stay in our hotel. He is never allowed to be alone with either of my kids. And he is also not allowed in my house since he was caught trying to steal a pocket knife which he said he needed for surgery on the family cat. He was almost 12 at the time. I once woke up to my little sister trying to smother me, but thankfully she was also too small to get the job done. We were 7 and 5. It was the first of 3 attempts she made on my life growing up. She did it because I had refused to sleep on her bed as a sacrifice to the boogeyman. Longer story, we had our own rooms, but I hadn't been allowed to sleep in mine for 2 years. She'd have a fit every time I tried to sleep in my own bed, and our parents would convince me to stay in her room just to get everyone to bed. They went so far as to install a bunk bed in her room, but she still insisted we share just one bed. One night, I woke up to her wetting the bed. I was angry because I didn't even want to be there in the first place, and now I was covered in pee. She screamed at me to get back in bed, and when I didn't, she got up and tried to attack me, smearing yet more pee all over me. So we were both shrieking at this point, and our parents woke up and came down. I don't remember the exact conversation since it's been almost 30 years, but the gist of it was that first she demanded I sleep in the piss puddle and she would just sleep against the wall and we'd pretend nothing had happened, and when my parents didn't agree, she became very distressed and admitted that she thought there was a monster in the closet, and had been insisting I sleep in the same bed with her so it wouldn't kill her. And she was terrified that if I moved back to my room, or even to a different mattress, she'd be eaten. Remember, she's only 5. My parents pulled the mattress off the top bunk and dragged the P1 outside and convinced me to be a good big sister and defend her from the monster. Reluctantly, I let myself be shuffled back into bed with her. I don't remember if it was that night or the next night, but as soon as we were alone, she whispered to me that she makes me sleep on the same mattress with her because someday the monster will come out to eat one of us, and she's going to escape while it's eating me. Without a word, I got up and moved to my room. I was willing to be there to defend her from her monster, but not to be a distraction for it. When our parents came down to investigate the screaming, I refused to move back to her room, and they finally relented. Later that night, I woke up because I couldn't breathe. My sister was on my bed trying to suffocate me with this blank, dead expression on her face. When our parents came back to investigate yet more yelling, she told them she'd just come into my room because she was scared of the monster. They didn't believe me that she was trying to smother me. I started sleeping with my door locked. I didn't think my sister would murder me, per se, because she enjoyed abusing me too much to straight up kill me. One of the biggest things that sticks out from my childhood growing up with her abuse was occasionally if I was sitting on the couch, back of couch facing kitchen, she'd come up behind me and run a butcher knife along my shoulders and neck until I turned around and realized she had a knife. I think she just enjoyed the fear in me realizing what was going on, that look of oh my god, that was a knife? Why the hell do you have a knife? My sister did stuff like this my whole childhood, and even after she was 19 and I was 17 she'd do crazy stuff like throwing a knife across the living room at me if she was mad enough at me. I cut contact with her as soon as I was able to leave at 18. My mom was 19 when I was born and we had a very close relationship when I was little. She was always more of a friend than a mom, and that's just how our relationship was. Before my stepdad, I was always sarcastic all the time, and we joked around a lot. One morning my mom asked me to take the pizza boxes from last night's dinner out to the garage where we put the cardboard recycling. I jokingly told her no as I gathered up the boxes to take them out. I took them out, put them on top of the stack of other cardboard, and turned around to go back into the house and I bumped into my stepdad who had come in behind me without me noticing. He then proceeded to lift my 13-year-old body completely off of the ground by my throat, and pinned me against the wall of the house. He got in my face and was screaming at me about disrespect. I remember flecks of spit getting on my face. My feet were back on the ground but I was still pinned and his hands were around my throat. I was able to get one of his hands in my mouth and I was biting and scratching him. I don't remember what happened next. I don't remember how I got to school. The next thing I remember is sobbing in a private ensemble room in the band hall. My mom still doesn't believe me. Over the next 2 years he continuously got worse and permanently destroyed my relationship with my mother. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow when he was home. I started running away and doing drugs. Eventually my behavior became bad enough that my mom sent me to live with my biological father. Life is better now. I am safe. I still have the occasional nightmare and cannot stand any sort of confrontation whatsoever, but I'll be okay. I have a male cousin who I strongly suspect is some kind of sociopath. When I was a child, I'm female by the way, I lived next door. He was in high school and I was in grade school. His family had a pool and we would often go over and hang out, which I dreaded because this cousin would, when no one was looking, sneak up on me and either throw me into the water or get in with me if I were already in and hold me under until I was so out of breath I would actually breathe in water and go limp. He would pull me up with me coughing and choking or I would claw desperately gasping for breath. He was laughing all the way. It was horrendous and it was creepy how jovial his expression was. He did this all the time and his parents or one of mine, usually my grandmother, would either mildly admonish him if caught or he would do it when no one was around. For some reason I was afraid to tell the extent of his abuses. There were smaller things, little acts of harassment like scaring me, taking my stuff, pulling my hair, taunting me, but the near drownings were the worst. This all went down at the ages of me being 5 to 9 and him 14 to 18. He also picked me up and literally held me, feet first, over the railing of the Royal Gorge Bridge on a family vacation. I think I went into shock and I just recall becoming very still. For that he did get in trouble at least. He apologized because he was forced, but his eyes were always kind of dead but with a sparkle if he were doing something egregious. Like a happy kind of twinkle. Oh yeah, once he had his brother hold me down while he poured tequila down my throat. He did get caught for that because I had to go to the ER. As a kid he was always running away and once killed a stray cat by choking it with barbed wire. He had on some kind of leather gloves. Weird thing is that all the neighborhood boys thought it was cool rather than call out as crazy. When he turned 16 and drove he would purposefully run over stray animals and laugh and brag about it. No one did anything. Enablers for sure. Talk about normalizing or minimizing bizarre behavior. He was extremely good looking like model material, but not to me. Because I saw what he was under the skin, the high school quarterback, adored by all. Girls fought over him. He played football on a scholarship at a Division I SEC school, but suffered a knee injury that ended his career. In high school and college he was always getting in trouble, frequent fights and DUIs, but he got bailed out every time and again, probably due to his athletic ability. It was swept under the rug. He also bragged he had his girlfriends do his schoolwork. He has been married 3 times and has stuck with his 3rd wife who is a martyr type. Scary thing is he is now a high school football coach and has been for decades and was just promoted to assistant principal. Scary, because I think he has no business working with minors. My mom, brother, and I came home to find all of my mother's diplomas and certificates had been gathered into a pile on the floor of our shared bedroom and burned. My mom is blind and had not been given much schooling as a child, so she worked her butt off once we were in school to get an education. Unfortunately, at this time we were forced to live with my grandmother and 2 mentally ill uncles. One of the uncles had a grow room, and the other didn't approve of pot, so he destroyed the room and blamed my mother. Dealer uncle became enraged and decided to burn my mom's certificates because you destroyed something I love, so I destroyed something you love. Your kids are next. This was a week after he shot my brother's cat because he was angry she had kittens in his boat. I've blocked out the next couple of weeks because apparently they were pretty bad, but I'm told that we had to disappear that night with only what we could carry in garbage bags. Not a family member, but my mother dated a crazy person after her divorce. We moved into an apartment and he moved in with us not long after. He had long hair and blue eyes and a beard and was the spitting image of white Jesus. And he took it to heart after a few people told him about the resemblance. He pulled me aside one day and told me that he had a secret and he wanted to tell me, but I couldn't tell anyone else because the government was looking for him. He confided in me that he was in fact Jesus Christ and that he escaped from a government facility after being captured in 1964. He said he escaped with the help of the Pope during his visit to the USA. The Pope's private security force broke him out, and once he was free the Pope advised him to blend in with regular people. He said the Pope told him to not draw any attention to himself. So no miracles, and tell no one. But he trusted me with this information. Jesus Christ was a roofer, in case you were curious. He constantly carried around his roofing hammer and one day it went missing. Jesus lost his mind. He locked my mother, my girlfriend, and myself in our apartment until it was found. This lasted 3 days. I was 18 at the time and was much larger than him and would have had no problem physically removing Jesus from our apartment, but my mother insisted he was having a mental episode and if I hurt him or did anything it may mess him up even worse. Turns out he left the hammer, which is really pretty much a hatchet, at a job site and a coworker drove over to return it. I sat there like an idiot and watched this guy hand axe to this lunatic and did nothing. Big mistake. Our 3-day-long lockdown turned into 5 days. The final 2 days was this illiterate nutcase attempting to read aloud from the Bible, getting maybe 1 in 5 words right. Remember in school when the teacher would have people read aloud and go around the room and there was always a dude you knew couldn't read, and his part would last 10 times longer than everyone else's part? Imagine that for 48 hours. Jesus would only let us eat bread and water. And the bread ran out quickly. There was a lake outside our apartment and on the 5th day Jesus was looking through the blinds at the lake and called me over to him. He confided in me again. He said, "You know I can walk right across that lake and right up into heaven." I replied, "If you do that I'll follow you anywhere. Go for it, man, I would love to see you do that." My plan was to get him out of the apartment and lock the door so my mom and girlfriend would be safe. And pray to this guy's dad that I can run faster than him and make it to a payphone to call 911. He looked at me with his crazy eyes and said, "You trying to get me caught?" I said, "No miracles." He raised up his roofing hammer and told me the only way I was following him anywhere was in the afterlife. It was at that point I thought, I'm going to die, and then he is going to kill my mother and girlfriend. I came to the sudden realization that I no longer cared if Jesus' mental breakdown would be affected by me beating the crap out of him or not. That was no longer my problem. Mid-rant about some religious stuff about 2 inches from my face. I swung as hard as I could and punched him right in the sternum. He still had the hatchet cocked over his shoulder, like someone throwing a football, so the blow caused him to lose his balance and fall over a dining room chair. He crumpled in a heap and my mother, ever the cool head, screamed at me for hitting him. I had knocked the wind out of him and he was gasping for air. My mother assumed he was dying. I would learn later in adulthood my mother was not the brightest light bulb. My girlfriend booked out the door with me close behind after grabbing my mother's arm and dragging her out of the door. I called the police and they came and got him. Last I heard he was in a hospital after he locked himself in a bedroom still saying he was Jesus. He was committed after he used a metal throwing dart to pick veins out of his arm. Never did get to see him walk across that lake though. Listening to my dad trying to persuade my mom they should kill me. I was about 8 maybe. I was a difficult child and my dad often couldn't cope. I remember sitting on the stairs while they were in the lounge listening to their argument. Eventually he persuaded my mom, and I heard them moving so I ran upstairs to hide. My dad came up and dragged me into the lounge. He was holding me down on the floor shouting to my mom, "Do you want me to do it? I'll do it if you wanted me to." She was crying and couldn't decide. Eventually she said no and he let me go and I ran back upstairs. I think they planned to kill me a few times but that was the scariest one. Another time my dad asked me to give him a hand getting something out of the shed. When my back was turned, he hit me in the back of the head with a hammer. I turned around and he was staring at me. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out. I ran past him to go to my mom who was making dinner in the kitchen. I was crying and shouting about what just happened but she didn't look at me or say anything. She wasn't shocked. It was like she knew what he was going to do. We were like a normal family in many ways. I went to school, went on holidays, I went out with friends, just bad things would happen at home that nobody else knew about. I think the worst things happened before I hit puberty. As a teenager it got better but we really got on. I would barely speak to him and he used to get really angry that I was ignoring him, but there wasn't any more physical violence. I remember when I was 15 maybe, we were arguing in the living room and he came charging towards me. It was the first time I stood up to him. I charged back at him with my fists raised. I was so angry and I thought I could take him. He backed off straight away. He looked like he was hugging himself as he ran off. From what I remember he didn't try to hit me again after that. I don't know if this is true but I was doubled up with stomach pain one night. My dad told me my mom tried to poison me. He brought it up in a few arguments. My mom was a sweet woman. I can't imagine her wanting to kill me off her own accord. I think my dad persuaded her to poison me. I left home at 18 when I went to university. I don't understand why I didn't leave sooner. I know I was scared of how I would cope in the big wide world and that's what stopped me leaving. I felt broken like I wouldn't be able to support myself. I moved into a house with my best friend and 6 others. I remember thinking it was so weird how nobody shouts at each other. I'm not in contact with my parents. My dad died a few years ago from brain cancer. I barely spoke to him before he died. I don't speak to my mom. She denies anything ever happened, that he never hit me and we just had some bad arguments sometimes. I don't feel like I could have anything to do with her until she acknowledges how things were when I was young. I think she is scared of the truth coming out. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. Feel free to share your own stories about psychopaths and sociopaths in the comments section. If any of my previous employers knew half of the things I've done, I'd have been fired. People with personality disorders, what are some of your success stories after being diagnosed? I was recently diagnosed with avoidant personality disorder. I'm 28. I grew up with the message that intimacy equals surrendering all control to the other person, and I was never able to trust my parents or family members because I knew they were more concerned about themselves than me. As an adult I've always tended to lose myself in relationships, lose sight of my own wants and needs and form myself around the wants and needs of my friends and partners, whilst feeling resentful for being unable to show the real me to anyone. Currently I have no real friends because I find that stuff exhausting, and I have a boyfriend, but I hate the way I absorb his values and opinions, and I miss being in touch with my true self like when I'm single. I desperately want to have meaningful relationships in my life, but I can't escape the impulse to become subservient to whomever I allow close to me, and I end up resenting them as their identities take hold of me. I don't want to be alone, but alone is the only way I feel in control of myself. I can't say I'm a success story because I only recently received this diagnosis and I still have a lot to work on, but at least I know what I'm dealing with now, and for me success will consist of learning how to actually share my true thoughts, feelings and opinions with people. Which is really hard, how to end a relationship that doesn't suit me rather than suiting myself to my relationships, and learning to trust myself even when others disagree with me. I think I have a long road ahead. I was suffering for years with unknown mental health issues and had a string of awful abusive relationships. I finally got diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, started getting help and meet an amazing person who supports me, puts up with my sometimes over-the-top mood swings with kindness and love. Sometimes I worry I'm putting too much on him and tell him this often. He always bats it away saying I'm worth it. To be clear, I don't abuse him or say horrible things to him. It's just my mood around him that can be toxic. If I get upset I can't really stop the process and it can be very stressful, with me crying and unable to self-soothe etc. I do my best to keep these things to a minimum, and I am getting better the more time goes by, and even just blurting out how I feel and getting a hug off him helps so much, knowing I'm not being judged even if I'm acting like a child. I still have a long road ahead, and maybe one day he will realize it's too much for him, which I would totally understand. It's shown me what a person can be, and what everyone deserves, love and understanding, and I'll always be grateful to him for that. I'm not unlovable just because I'm sick. To say I've had a diagnosis or two, been through the ringer a bunch, and have had to deal with the repercussions of that would be an understatement. What I can say though, is when I finally addressed it to the people I trust and care about, it lifted a great weight. I guess my advice would be just own it, don't sugarcoat, joke about it, and overall let loved ones know you recognize the behavior and move forward with the assumption that it was a learning experience and people progress. Often it makes you a much better person. I've been with my boyfriend for 5+ years, and was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder about 2.5 years into our relationship. Before my diagnosis, even though we got along amazingly, communicated well, and were generally happy, I would find myself throwing toddler-like tantrums at any perceived or imagined slight. I hated this about myself. I thought I was a bad person because I just couldn't control myself. My partner happens to be an amazing people reader. He seems to just naturally pick up on people's personality and intentions as easily as I notice hair color. He was nothing but understanding. Even though we had little knowledge of mental health, we both knew something was off, and he was a constant support as I sought out treatment. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and given a therapist who specialized in post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. It turns out my flare-ups were somehow similar to a PTSD flashback. I was taught a bunch of techniques to use when I felt myself starting to flare out. It was also the first time I realized that my parents had been incredibly emotionally negligent. To the point where I hadn't actually learned to deal with emotions. What was accidentally taught instead was that if I am angry or sad, I am about to be yelled at. It's taken 3 years, but I've found the right combo of meds. I'm not cured, and I'm definitely not perfect. But I don't have flare-outs anymore. Sure, I sometimes raise my voice when I shouldn't, or get into a stupid argument with my boyfriend, but I'm working on myself every day and we're super solid, and super in love. I'm actually typing this beside him, aboard a ferry on our way to what will hopefully be our new life. In 3 hours I'll be doing the entrance exam for a college program that I'm really excited about. Afterwards we're checking out the shop he'll be managing in September. We have a cat and a dog together, we illustrated a book together, found a 20,000-year-old fossil together, and foraged together at least once a week. Girl with borderline personality disorder here, also known as she's a psycho, stay away from her, in common media. I started my current relationship before I'd been diagnosed. I had cheated on my previous 2 boyfriends, and gotten together with the guy I cheated with. He got me to realize that my brain wasn't doing normal things. Turns out sabotaging your own life and having panic attacks at the thought of people canceling plans is not a normal person thing to do. So I went to the doctor, and got diagnosed with BPD. I'd already gotten a diagnosis of depression, generalized anxiety disorder and social anxiety disorder in the past, and was struggling with them at the same time. Getting diagnosed made everything easier. Suddenly I knew why I panicked every time people canceled plans. Why my emotions seemed to never match the situation, and why they were so strong. Why I decided to sabotage every relationship I had by cheating. And knowing the reason behind the actions meant that I could get better, and work to control my brain instead of it controlling me. He helped me work on my issues, and stuck by me. Helped me move out of my parents' place, which meant getting away from the abuse that had caused all of my mental health problems in the first place. Turns out that getting away from the source of the issues really helps with recovery. We're still together 5.5 years later, and looking to buy a house together soon. We own cats, and have talked about, and ultimately decided to wait another 5-ish years, starting a human family. I have antisocial personality disorder. I was initially self-diagnosed when I randomly was reading mental disorder descriptions, etc. I didn't realize that I was the problem for a long time. I just thought I was a little messed up, but that everyone was. Later, after connecting the dots, I could correspond every marker of ASPD to current and past behaviors, so I saw a doctor and got a real diagnosis. I'm not going to claim to speak for everyone, but this is how my mind works. Anything in the future is ephemeral. I can't get excited, scared, nervous, or happy about anything that isn't happening in the present, or within maybe a day. Because of this, I have an intensely hard time planning and following through with plans. I have gotten in trouble more than once due to unpaid parking tickets, not because I didn't have the money to pay them, but because I had no fear or anxiety about paying them. And I could easily compartmentalize the whole subject away. Of course, I did get arrested twice due to these, but I paid the fine then and got out. I have webs of lies, because I'm impulsive, and I impulsively lie. Sometimes lying is for my own gain, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I lie and only realize later, thinking back, that I lied to the person. I have never in my life felt guilty about lying, or anything really, despite torpedoing several different relationships. I will realize I lie, and make a goal to stop lying, and then I'll forget and have new lies to deal with. If I get an opportunity to do something I want in the moment, regardless of morality or legality, it's very, very hard to resist. I have no problem resisting if it's obvious I would get caught. But if I'm mostly certain I can get away with it, I'll do it. After doing it, I don't have any nervousness, guilt, or apprehension. I just deal with resulting problems as they come. I have extremely dulled emotions. I can count on one hand the number of times I've cried in my entire life. I don't feel fear unless it's immediate. Love is tricky, and I'm not sure if I feel love or if it's a mental obligation to maintain things that I feel I need, like family members. I don't like drama movies at all, because it's only interpersonal relationships, and those all ring hollow to me because I don't have any comparisons because I don't feel those things. I have maybe 1 or 2 friends, and they know my nature, if not my diagnosis. I don't do well with them, because I don't upkeep my relationships, because if there is an immediate distress or problem, then I don't care enough to work on it. I indulge in tons of self-destructive behavior, because my brain doesn't give me any feelings to stop these things. I know they are wrong, but my brain is able to convince me that, with no immediate consequences, that I can avoid the consequences. I have made very intense efforts to avoid meth, heroin and the like because I'm afraid they will end me. I'm non-violent. A lot of people with ASPD are violent, but that is the only symptom I've never manifested. I can maintain a job because I employ tons of deception and lying. If any of my previous employers knew half of the things I've done on the job, I'd have been fired. If I wasn't a good liar, I would be on the street, because I can't control my impulses. It's not he's just an butthole that does what he wants and doesn't take responsibility. I always take full responsibility of my actions when they come out. I have intensely regretted doing things after I've done them, but that passes in minutes or hours. My brain fully and completely removes all non-immediate fear or danger from actions, and, consequently, I do them. I resist doing tons of stuff, but I'm not even close to perfect. I've felt this way since I was a kid. I just didn't realize I was different in my own mind. To add a sprinkle of something I've witnessed, one of my good friends is a diagnosed sociopath, and he is very open about it and has stated he had to learn empathy. He is very self-destructive, but he is the most reliable person I know, and there are many people in his life that would do anything for him, myself included. His transparency helps us understand his behavior, and he is always open to discussing how his actions have made people feel. I have schizoid personality disorder and it's really not that interesting. I was also diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and schizophrenia, so those took priority. I didn't even realize I had it until I reread an old document years later. There's no real treatment for it, but finding out helped me understand myself better. Also, if you get a mental evaluation done, you should really get a professional to interpret it. Not antisocial disorder, but a very antisocial person. I'm a diagnosed autist with chronic depression due to childhood abuse. Where to start? I have this intense need to be alone, yet I hate to be lonely. I want to have friends, yet I hate any form of socializing. I feel like an empty shell. I combine different pieces of behavior and information to form some sense of me. I feel a different person depending whom I interact with. Like some B-movie actor. So I hide everything that might make me different. Sometimes I fail, the mask cracks. When that happens, I avoid or ghost those people. I have no social instinct, everything needs to be done consciously. I understand that's my burden. The worst part is the loneliness. No matter how loving and understanding my friends, family and partner are, there's a lingering loneliness I can never shake off. I know they love me and I try to too. But the majority of the time it just doesn't seem to reach me. No sense of guilt to be found either. It's so hard to explain. I see it as most people's emotions, dreams, souls, whatever makes them floating in huge strings of soap balls on the wind of life. You know those kind kids blow. When meeting others, the balls bounce against each other, and when they become friends the soap balls stick. And sometimes, when we truly love each other, our soap balls merge together into a bigger one. Now I'm not in a ball of soap, I'm in a hard plastic ball, but I can see and understand them. I can see their dreams, their beings. They're sticking to me, yet they'll never merge with me. Is that still true understanding though? Something somewhere is disconnected, yet I can see the green grass on the other side never to be reached. Despite the messed up mess I am, I found an equally messed up person. She suffered from beatings and mental abuse herself. We have great comfort and understanding in each other through trauma. She's my people shield, since just existing on this earth for 5 hours drains all my energy to live there. I know it's very hard on her. One day I'm king of the world, the other a paranoid maniac. But being with her I finally understand what happiness can be. I just wish I had some turn-off button I can flick when I feel an episode coming up. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. Open and honest communication is the key to successful relationships. You see it thrown around so often because it's so true. Seeing a therapist has been the biggest success though. I found out I have terrible codependency. I used to get upset, anxious, or jump through hoops trying to cheer my significant other up when I noticed he was down, to the point of getting upset if he didn't respond well to my efforts. For anyone relating to this is codependency. Mine was caused by my parents constantly making me responsible for their moods. Your mood should rely on you only. Expecting the moods of others to be a certain way so you can feel good is a toxic trait. The advice that worked for me is to remember to give each other space when this happens. Now when I see my partner is down, I give him space. I cook our dinner, clean up, and then go do my own thing, whether that's gardening, watching something, or reading. Ever since I've started, I've noticed a lot of tension has been squashed. The biggest success was our sex life though. Almost every time we had sex my PTSD was being triggered, and when I finally told him about it, it was during the heat of an argument, so it came out all wrong and I basically passed a complex onto my significant other where he was worried about it every time we had sex. He stopped instigating sex for a while because of it. This gave me some super mixed feelings, even to the point that I convinced myself he was cheating on me. This was what led me to my first appointment with my therapist. Communication was thrown out, but she also gave me pointers on healthy, open communication. One person speaking, one listening, and the one listening need not immediately jump to the defense but rather must try to jump to an understanding of one another. Since then our sex life is basically as strong as it was during the honeymoon phase. It feels like I've been reborn since going to therapy. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. And let me know your thoughts on the topic in the comments below. She always leaves a horrible mess of destruction and pain in her wake. Parents of sociopaths, psychopaths, or people who have done terrible things, how do you feel about your offspring? Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. I had my son when I was 21 years old. He was unplanned. His mother and I had been together for a little over a year when she got pregnant. I was working at a pizza place when he was born. I remember the first time I saw him, he had big blue eyes and looked a lot like his mother. I loved him from the first time I saw him. I told myself I was going to do whatever it takes to bring him happiness. The first 3 months were wonderful. I was learning how to be a father and spent a lot of time with him. Times got rough. Money was a problem and my relationship with his mother was a disaster. We fought a lot, screamed. I regret those screams. She developed a painkillers addiction after an operation and there was a constant malaise when we were together. She wasn't the same. I tried to help her but she wouldn't let me. More fighting ensued. A week after his first birthday I found out that his mother had been cheating on me. There was no reconciliation possible. It was broken. I moved out, tried to get custody but lost in court. Only saw him every 2 weeks. He was a normal child, liked Pokémon a lot. We would watch it together when he was at my place. Gave him gifts, cuddled him, told him I loved him and was proud of him while he was growing up, and then things changed. At around 8 years old he became distant, rarely talked, was prone to fits and spent most of his time in his room. I tried to get him to talk to me but it was of no use. I saw a huge bruise on his left shoulder one day. I asked him where he got it. He shrugged it off. Then it was a broken finger, and then a rib. I contacted the police. His mother said he was clumsy and always fell, but my son finally admitted that she beat him but the cops did nothing. I finally got his custody when he was 12. His mother took too much pain meds and had set fire to her apartment. She was declared unfit. He was never the same. The joyful child he was gone. I tried to get him help but he'd run off. I tried to get him to meet a counselor but he ditched the meeting. As he was going through adolescence I was seeing less and less of him. He started to hang out with questionable kids and got into pretty hard drugs. I did what I could to get him out of this slippery slope but to no use. He hated me. The more I told him I loved him, the more he despised me. I found heroin needles on his room's floor. When I questioned him about it he pulled a knife at me, called me a piece of dog crap and ran away. He was 18. He never came back home. On October 8, 2009 I got a phone call I'll never forget. It was my son, calling from jail. "Help me, Dad, they're saying I raped someone." My son had apparently picked a 14-year-old from the mall, told her he was some kind of talent scout, brought her to his friend's apartment, knocked her out, beat her and raped her mercilessly. He denied, claimed his innocence but evidence was overwhelming. I visited him in prison until one day I asked him why he did it. He looked at me with the coldest face and said I had too much free time on my hands and not enough vagina under my fists. I cried. He laughed. I have not seen him since. Keep in mind, first of all, that sociopath and psychopath aren't clinical diagnoses. I'm answering this using the commonly accepted laypeople's idea of this term. I adopted a 7-year-old boy about 14 years ago. It was the worst decision of my entire life. He was, and is, a sociopath. He lies. He steals. He hurts. He cheats. He can be incredibly superficially charming, but leaves a truly awe-inspiring wake of emotional and physical destruction behind him everywhere he goes. I say awe-inspiring because unless you've spent time around this, unless you truly understand how amazingly destructive this can be to a person's very self, you just don't get it. The psychiatrist during pre-adoption gave some warnings in her brief. The social worker, whose job it is to get kids adopted, pushed and pushed, poo-pooing the psychiatrist's reports, minimizing them and insisting reports from his placements were biased. Now, understand, I am not inexperienced. I have other kids. I've worked with special needs kids. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can prepare someone to have this inflicted on themselves. It changed me. It fundamentally changed me as a person. It did the same to everyone else in the family, in different ways. Friends tell me I am less outgoing, slower to laugh and smile and joke, less prone to trust, and far, far, too matter-of-fact and blasé about everything. I've developed the latter as a survival defense mechanism. One learns quickly, one simply cannot react emotionally to anything. At all. Ever. As it will be used brutally against you. Even when as a teen he steals your car, ignores you when confronting him in the driveway as he attempts to make his getaway, then runs over you in the process, hurting you fairly badly. And then driving away while you lie there screaming, and then coming back hours later, and acting as if literally nothing has happened. Even conning the authorities into thinking it was a silly accident despite testimony and another witness account. He has stolen more things than I can imagine from home. Game consoles, electronics, computers. He is indiscriminate. Now an adult, he steals from children, just to pawn the stuff to pay off his dealer so he doesn't get beat. He's never held down a job for more than a week or two, and that only 3 or 4 times in his life. He survives by manipulating and stealing. But, he knows it all and will tell everyone, and me, in detail, how they are doing everything wrong and how easy it is to be wealthy. He doesn't appear to see the irony at all. He lies like most people breathe. Literally, every word that comes out of his mouth is manipulative and untrue in some way. One learns to expect it. Nothing, at all, ever, is at face value. It is horrible. He is horrible. I hate him. But I love him. I spent so much time and effort trying to help. He returned the effort by hurting, manipulating, lying, stealing. I cannot help wishing he would get in a traffic accident, get stabbed, shot, beat up into a coma, disabled. I cannot help feeling like a horrible, disgusting human being, despite everything he's done, for even allowing myself to think this. But I still think it. Again and again. He is no longer living here, but every time nobody is home, we return wondering what will be missing or wrecked. He doesn't get caught, legally. He's just barely smart enough and charming enough to set up others instead, and somehow manage to keep himself out of trouble. Mostly. He's been tuned up by former friends, investigated, etc. But so far has managed to avoid serious repercussions. I have little doubt it will catch up with him eventually. Hopefully somebody won't be badly hurt or die before this happens. It's a constant nightmare. Slowly getting better as our lives move apart, and with the incredible help of friends and family to set and brutally enforce limits. He's a dangerous person though. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that one day I may wake up to a gunshot or a knife wound. Moral of the story. If there's any hint at all, of a kid having no ability for empathy, lack of remorse, no moral development, and incredibly superficially charming, then run. Run fast. Run hard. Run away and never, ever look back. Just get away. I think my mom is a sociopath. I was raised by my grandparents for the first 13 years of my life, but she was in and out for most of that time. When I was 5, her boyfriend tried to choke me to death. She was mad at the time, but afterwards, she didn't report it and we continued to stay with him. My grandpa used to hit me, and was constantly mean to me, made me sit on the floor, wouldn't let me talk around him, threw me outside by my hair, told me I was stupid, worthless, etc. That sucked, but when I went to live with my mother, who'd supposedly cleaned up her act, it got worse. Physical pain and terror are bad, and everything, but my mom tried to unmake me. Her crap messed with my mind, almost drove me insane. By the time I moved out, I was planning to murder her and then myself. And that would not have been the first, even the second time someone tried to kill her. She would act like she was the only person who ever loved me, not an unrealistic concept, considering how everybody else in our life treated me, then be needlessly cruel and nasty. She's a practicing anorexic, so we would crash diet together, and she always told me I would be so pretty if I just lost a few more pounds. When I tried to get recovery for my own anorexia, she was actively negative. She complained about what I was doing to myself when I started to gain weight. Whenever I would try and stand up to her, she would cry and complain that I was taking advantage of her, being a terrible daughter, breaking her heart, etc. Instead of beating on me like my grandpa did, she would torture me. Literally stuff that is against the Geneva Convention. She would keep me awake at night. She would tell me detailed plans for suicide. In the morning she would wake me up by dragging me out of my bed by my feet, screaming the whole time about something I couldn't have possibly done to her. She would alternate concern and violence or threats of violence completely at random. You never knew what she would act like, minute to minute. She's told me before that she treated me so horribly because of my bad karma. If I ever tried to point out how toxic this all was, she would tell me I brought it on myself by being negative. The thing that really makes her a sociopath is that this is not insane behavior. This is just the stuff she did to keep me distracted and confused so that she could get the $300 a month state aid for having me in her house. If I'd ever been aware enough to leave, that money would have gone with me. Which it eventually did when I did leave. She does it to my grandma. She tells her one thing, then another, then confuses them with each other. Then my uncle thinks my grandma is getting dementia, and my mom totally agrees, because she needs grandma's car, or she needs everybody to be too upset that grandma is confused to wonder why grandma is paying part of her rent. Her ex-boyfriend pays her car payment. For a while, she bragged that he still thought they were together, joking that he's too old and ugly. I know she mocks him because he can't get it up. He can't get it up because he has prostate cancer. He's a really nice man, and she will do anything to ensure that she's in his will, and that she gets as much out of him as she can before he dies. To this day she pretends she doesn't understand why she can't have my address. She actually asked me what she'd done to me lately to deserve such horrible treatment. Lately. The only reason she hasn't hurt me lately is because she doesn't know where I am, and only has the most basic details of my life. I'm not a parent, but I have an older sister who I believe would be considered a sociopath. She has torn apart my family, physically hurt us, stolen from us, lied to us, among other terrible things. My mother, the kindest woman in the world, has been completely physically and emotionally ravaged by my sister, Brandy. Brandy was born 8 years ahead of me, in 1981. My mother was married to an abusive alcoholic at the time, Brandy's father, Vic. He disappeared shortly after she was born and never heard from again. However, Mom says she sees a lot of Vic in my sister, that he had a very similar personality. When Brandy was 5, my mom met my dad. She was extremely unhappy with the new addition to the family and would often have random fits of rage and throw things at my dad and become physically violent. My dad just thought she needed to adjust to having a male role model in her life, and she would eventually settle down. That never happened. Shortly after Brandy's 8th birthday, I was born. This caused even more disruption. When I was around 6 months old, she began covering my mouth with her hands, when I wasn't crying. When I was happy. Because happy babies disgusted her. She also began stealing my toys, blankets, and binkies, throwing them in the trash. My parents started to grow really concerned, and started sending her to counseling. They could not figure out why she acted like this. They are kind, loving, caring parents, doing their best. Around this time, they find out they are pregnant again, with my little sister, who was born about 1.5 years after I was. When my little sister turns 1, Brandy throws her into a wall and breaks her arm. My parents are extremely scared, frustrated, and unprepared. They decide it might be best for her to live with my grandma, 2 hours away. From 10 to 13, Brandy is molested by my step-grandpa, until his death, we found out years later, and my mom has never forgiven herself. This is when her life really starts to spin out of control. She begins stealing, lying, cheating, sleeping around, etc. She develops an alcohol and drug problem by age 15. She is expelled at age 16. At age 18, she throws my grandma to the ground and steals her car. She ends up with a man who is in his 40s. Chris becomes my brother-in-law. He is an alcoholic, a felon, has a gambling problem, a drug addict, a woman beater, thief, just an all-around bad person. But he is terrified of Brandy. He once told me she is evil, an evil he never wants to experience again. He is currently in hiding with their son, who is also terrified of my sister. She ends up pregnant at 22. She doesn't care. She drinks, smokes, does drugs. My nephew is born blind and develops autism. She would contact us when she needed something, but we could never find her. She would find us, and it always ended up hurting. She runs away from everyone with her son and abandons him at age 4 in a crib in an apartment in Alaska. He is found 3 days later, extremely malnourished, laying in his own poop. It was horrible. She's 32 now. I have no idea where she is at the moment. My parents have a restraining order against her, and moved. Here's a list of horrible things she has done to us. Stolen my vehicle and my mom's, broke into my parents' home and smashed every single dish and pulled everything from the cabinets and pantry into a giant pile in the middle of the kitchen. Tried to stab my dad. Tried to stab me. Abandoned my little sister and me at a mall 6 hours from home when we were 11 and 12. Covered my little sister's mirror in her blood, after she slit her wrists. Tried to steal my identity. Accused my brother-in-law of raping her. Tried to smother my grandmother in the hospital, she blames everything on her, etc. She always leaves a horrible mess of destruction and pain in her wake. She cons people for fun. She uses women and men. I'm sure she's probably killed someone at some point in her life, or will. She is pretty and extremely charming, until she has a complete breakdown. I don't even know how to explain the feeling she gives me. It is on a level of creepy I have never experienced other than with her. Just her smile makes me want to vomit. My brother is schizophrenic, a drug abuser and an alcoholic. His schizophrenia was not diagnosed for a long time, and as a result he wasn't properly treated until very late in his life. Growing up with him was a nightmare. He would physically assault my sisters and I. He would steal money, he would take our bikes and wreck them. He would destroy things that he knew we liked. He would get raging drunk or stoned and launch into violent episodes every holiday. Hell, all the time, but the holidays really got him going. It once took 6 cops to wrestle him into submission to be hauled off to get medical or mental treatment. The best parts of my childhood, pre-getting my license, were when his butt was in various mental institutions. It meant we finally had peace in the house. The list of hurts, assaults, thefts, attacking any friends we allowed over, goes on and on and on, and it is very hard to fully articulate what it was like growing with him. I could list dozens and dozens of hurts that evil sack of crap did to my sisters and I, and each would not do justice to describing the living hell it was to deal with him. I have read stories about people having abusive parents, and it is the same sort of thing. My parents were divorced and my mom did her best, but what can one do with that, when you have to work all day and all you want to do at the end of the day is crash? The only good part of it all was that he consumed all of my mother's energy, so I was completely unsupervised, and when I got my license, I got myself a car and I was pretty much never home after. In the summer I would split for weeks. As a 16-year-old I drove to the Outer Banks of North Carolina from Charlottesville. It is about a 45 minutes drive, with nowhere to stay, and lived out of the car, crashing at friends' places, sleeping on porches of vacation homes for about a week. I did this with very little money and with no one knowing I had done it other a few friends I hung around with. I actually had a ton of fun in high school, and when I got to college I loved life. Mental illness is a serious disability, and living with a disabled person is a nightmare. My brother is in jail. He's adopted, which is only important because it means I can sleep at night knowing that I don't possess the potential that he has. He has ADHS, FA, FAD, OD, ODS, RAD, and is bipolar and very aggressive. He doesn't have a legal note that he's a sociopath, since he was put in prison before he was 18, but if you look up the definition, it describes him perfectly. The first time I realized that gave me chills. I could go into detail about him, but the short of it is, I hate him. He's my brother, and regardless of how he joined the family, that is a fact. But after he molested children and tried to kill my father, I stopped talking to him. That was 5 or 6 years ago. I've lost count. That boy ruined my family and stole my childhood. Instead of happy memories, I have the memories of our town's cops ingrained in my head. Instead of enjoying childhood, I had to know about my mother trying to kill herself and having my father coming and crying to me while I was barely a teenager. The worst part of it all is watching my parents. For everything my brother did to me, he was just who he was, a manipulative sociopath. For my parents, he was their son and they were doing everything they could do for him. Even after he tried to kill my dad is still his biggest advocate and believes he can change. It is heartbreaking to see. I know my parents are split in emotions depending on the day. Some days they believe he's making progress and will see the light. Those are the hardest, as I have to decide whether to remind them he's manipulating them to get what he wants, or if I should let them have false hope. Some days they feel the way I do, that he has driven them to bankruptcy, ruined their futures and made them miss their backburner daughter's life. I am a step-parent to a boy whom I believe to be a psychopath. I met his father 5.5 years ago, and my stepson, let's call him B, had just turned 2. I had my own son, known as E, who was 3. At the time B had just started throwing fits. We, of course, thought they were from the terrible twos. We thought it would stop. B's mom had always been in his life, but had never had custody. Just visitation, which was never regular, but she saw him at least once a month. She wasn't a horrible mother, and still isn't. But when she lived with anyone, she would foist all childcare responsibilities to that person. She also has bipolarity running in her family. They all pull crazy stunts, but for the most part, are just good enough to pass within societal standards. When B turned 3 he continued his fit throwing, but including urinating on things and himself to get revenge for punishment. We continued to discipline him with timeouts, spankings, or taking toys away, but we still thought it was just a phase. 3 months before he turned 4, B's father and I got married. We also started him in counseling. We kept him in it for a long while, even though it only seemed to make him worse. There was never a day without a fit. We also started him in a preschool for 3-year-olds. I also worked there, but not with him. I was ashamed/embarrassed because he constantly threw stuff, screaming, hitting, kicking fits over things like using the restroom, washing his hands, or putting toys away. We eventually couldn't afford his counseling anymore due to other medical bills. His behavior continued into kindergarten. His teacher believed he had ADD because he refused to pay attention and do his work. He eventually told the school counselor that he just didn't want to do it. This is a continuing problem today. We battle over it constantly, and not just with schoolwork, but the basic kid things, personal hygiene, cleaning his room, chores, helping around the house at all, etc. He is now 7.5. He still throws screaming, raging fits. He also still urinates for revenge. I have to clean his bathroom constantly because when he gets mad, he goes in and pees all over the floor and shower curtain. He also lies in bed every morning and pees himself, then changes his underwear. He does that even when he hasn't been in trouble. He refuses to wash himself in the shower. It's been weeks since he last washed his hair. We've simply given up on that. He refuses to do the majority of his homework. He constantly lies about everything. He makes up grand stories about all kinds of stuff, from things you can't really do in a Minecraft game to saying my mother punched him. He takes anything you say and twists it wildly around in his head, then throws it back at you, starting that you hate him or want him to die or want to kill him. He has ripped up his own clothing, his toys, his bedding, and anything else he can lay his hands on. He also tried to manipulate every situation he can and has been known to steal, particularly from school. No matter what you do or say or try, he will argue with you until he's won or thinks he has. No matter what we do or where we go, even if it's just for him, he's unhappy. Always, always unhappy. He has never been molested or touched by anyone. We know this for certain and have had him evaluated by his new counselor just in case. Our families don't have extended contact with him for all the reasons listed, but my mother generally keeps him one night every 2 weeks. His mother's family are hugely into bikers against child abuse. We know them all personally and no one new has come into his life. Plus, when he's with his mom, who is now a lesbian, he generally doesn't see her family much. The reason I'm telling this is because his latest terrible behavior is sexual. The first time he was alone with his Kindle, 15 minutes while my mother did laundry, he looked up boobs on YouTube and watched a bunch of videos. He got in a lot of trouble, including having no Kindle and no YouTube access, but went to his mom's and did the same thing, but tried to show his little 6-year-old sister. Also within the last year, he has told E that he has touched his sister's boobs and peeped on her while she's naked. Not to mention all the times he has touched E's private parts, including an incident when he put his mouth on E's crotch. E was wearing jeans, and bit down. He also touched our toddler S's behind repeatedly, in a not nice way. He is no longer allowed to be with him alone. He is currently back in counseling. Although there has been no improvement in months and the counselor is running out of ideas. How do I feel about him? Honestly, I can't stand him. I know he's only 7, but he has ripped our family apart. My husband and I are completely different people than we ever were. We are tired and stressed from the daily battle with him. We are sad and drained from our own feelings toward him. And we are guilty. So heavily and deeply guilty. My husband is especially guilty, feeling that he put this awful burden on me, E, and S. This is a child I have loved with my whole heart. I would say that at one time, I even loved him more than my son, E, but the continued conflict and screaming and hate he spews has caused me to retract a lot of that love. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I care for him every single day, all day. I will continue to do so, but when he turns 18, I'm not sure what will happen. My hope is that he gets better, but I honestly no longer believe that will ever happen. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the bell notification for more videos like this. And remember, not all people who are diagnosed as psychopaths behave like this. Many have been in therapy and live normal lives. Anyway, share your own psychopath or sociopath stories in the comments. He said, "If I ever see you with someone else, I'll shoot you in your pretty face." Friends of sociopaths and psychopaths, what was your most uncomfortable moment with them? My sister is a sociopath. It took me a lot of years to realize this and stop rationalizing it. I'm a diabetic and have been in comas. During the last one in 2015, after a year of no contact, she showed up at the hospital saying I had expressed to her that my wishes were do not resuscitate. About 12 of my friends shouted her down and I woke up 3 days later on my own. If I had coded during that time, however, there would have been a lot of gray area around if they were allowed to revive me. About 4 months later she took out a life insurance policy on me and asked me to sign it. I said no. I no longer speak to her. I dated someone who I now believe is a sociopath. The most uncomfortable thing while we were dating was that he would constantly whisper things in my ear in public, in earshot of other people, like, "Do you think I look hot right now? Or do you think I'm cool?" And the first few times I thought he was joking, so I laughed, and he'd get angry. He wanted a serious answer. He wanted me to tell him how much I wanted to jump his bones right there in front of all of our friends, while they were watching and listening. I'd get lectured afterwards like, you know, you really insulted me personally when you laughed at me in front of everyone. He could also cry on cue to get what he wanted, and as soon as he got what he wanted, it would instantly switch off and he'd turn very serious and tell me what a horrible person I was. The instant emotional switches are disarming. When he broke up with me, I went from being his favorite person in the world to instantly at the very bottom of his list. He laughed when I cried on multiple occasions, calling me ridiculous. What's very alarming about people like him is how many people they can get on their side with their charm. None of his current friends know anything about his behavior behind closed doors. And they're all new people. All the people who caught on when we were dating are gone from his life. He has convinced his new friends that I'm a psychopath because I tried to tell others what happened. So whenever I say anything about what a creep he is, I get brigaded by the new people who are now being manipulated. Also, he is completely dead in the face and eyes, until you interact with him, and then it's like he becomes animated. I was making some brownies. My sister was visiting for some reason. Maybe it was Christmas. Anyway, I like my brownies gooey and hot, so I'm cutting into them a little earlier than I should. Sister flips out and starts beating on me, grabbing heavier and more dangerous weapons from whatever she can reach, pans, rolling pins, etc. Becomes a scuffle where she keeps screaming, "Stop hitting me!" while all I'm doing is grabbing her wrists to avoid taking one to the head. Maybe it's not the most uncomfortable she's made me or the most evil thing she's done, and she's done worse to people we aren't related to, I know, but when people ask why is your sister so crazy, that's the memory that comes into my head. Her gigantic freak out over brownies that I was making. Someone replied, "I've encountered something like this before, and it was equally bizarre to see for the first time. It was college. I shared a suite with 3 roommates. I was in a side room and one roommate and a visitor were in the main one. The 2 involved had minimal prior contact. The visitor, female, blew up at the roommate, male, over a minor annoyance, in this case his peeling packing tape off the roll. I guess it was too loud or something. Literally in about 60 seconds she escalated from these weird irritated whine growls, to demands for him to stop, to insults, and then it was suddenly hitting, kicking, scratching, threats, like a full-on tantrum. Anytime that he did anything to defend himself, putting his arms up, grabbing at her wrists, pushing her back, she would start screaming in pain and saying things like, "Stop, how could you do that? What's wrong with you?" And saying it like she meant it. Everything she did was way out of proportion with what was happening in reality. Crazy. The moment I made my presence known, she detached herself from the encounter, made a frustrated sound, and stomped off. Barely an hour later, she's back like absolutely nothing happened. I've been long-time friends with a sociopath. He is honestly like my brother. We have developed this relationship that basically treats me like his moral compass, but it doesn't always work. He is still manipulative and cruel at times, and he does only truly care about himself, but he tries to be a good person because he doesn't want to be a butthole. This being said, my most uncomfortable moment with him would have to be when he was telling me about watching some guy almost die. He was telling me how he knew he should have stopped watching and helped him. But he was too interested in what the outcome would be if he didn't help. It was creepy to know that as hard as he may try to be a decent person, sometimes he still can't help himself. He once tried to manipulate me to come in and work basically 50 hours, 10 of which would be off the clock so that I didn't get overtime, because he knew that if he could keep labor low on his shift he could get a promotion. He would also expressly lie to my face about giving me a break, saying verbatim, "I'll come back here in a moment and take over, so that you can go on break." Then he would just never come. Then when the time has passed to where a break would be irrelevant, i.e. 30 minutes before my shift is over, he'd offer again. I have a friend who's a pathological liar. He's also mostly Scottish in heritage, northern Scotland, where the Viking influence is. He's 6 feet 8 inches, 350 pounds when he's watching his weight, 400 plus when he isn't, and there's a lot of muscle to go with everything else. The lies aren't all that awful most of the time. He's known as a very entertaining storyteller and everyone knows he'll embellish greatly from time to time. But he can't keep a girlfriend, apparently he can't be honest, is a pathological cheater. The lies catch up with his relationships in a few weeks at most. One day we were in a taxi together and he got the idea that the driver was taking a route that was unnecessarily long. He stopped the cheerful story he was telling me mid-sentence. His face changed and he barked at the cab driver in a voice I'd never heard, loud and angry and aggressive. The cab driver immediately pulled over and let us out without paying, and a good thing too. I think my friend was about to kill him. I was petrified in my seat. I felt like he might kill everyone in range. I was terrified. It was the last time I spent time with him, though I had known him for 20 years. I later learned that he won't associate with someone after they've seen him snap, as one of his other ex-friends put it. In high school, my boyfriend at the time and I shared a math class together. It was well known we were dating, so I would always take him his homework via teacher's request if he missed. He skipped a lot. I broke up with him over Christmas break. He cheated on me. Math teacher obviously still assumed we were together, so he asked me to bring him his homework. I did. Got to his house, wanting to drop it off at his doorstep. He told me to come in and explain it to him. He locked his bedroom door and started saying stuff like, "If I can't have you, then no one else can. I could get you back in a second. Just admit it," etc. Then the true kicker: if I killed you or if you died, I would keep your body in my closet or hung behind my door just to have sex with it. Disclaimer: I never had sex with him and I think that killed him. He then proceeded to try to make out with me and jam his hands down my pants. He actually thought it was endearing and had no idea why I was so upset. I got out, called my mom to pick me up, and ran back to the school. He lived close. Terrifying. To this day I'm still horrified about it and him. Last I heard he was trying to be a magician, looks like Charles Manson, and is in and out of psych wards. Someone in our extended family. He offered to kill my cat for me to save a vet bill. The cat wasn't sick. Or old. He was just very enthusiastic about helping us out with that particular issue. He's not allowed to be alone with pets anymore. But this wasn't the first incident. At a family gathering he took the family dog for a walk. He returned with the dog soaking wet. It was December, and he claimed the dog had chased a squirrel into the river. People didn't entirely believe that story, somehow. He also tends to just leave gatherings without telling anyone, sleeps in the garden instead of on the couch, and he rarely blinks. He is just altogether a little odd. My brother is a sociopath, as well as a homeless heroin junkie. For the most part he stays hidden from view and away from my family. During his active times where he comes around looking for money from family members is the most uncomfortable, because when he doesn't get it he resorts to burglary. Having to leave home not knowing if you'll be burglarized is stressful. I wish he would just go to prison already. It would be so much better for everyone. I married one. Last straw was the day I caught his reflection as I passed by. Pure evil and hatred in his eyes. I told him I was leaving the following week. He said, "If I ever see you somewhere with someone else, I won't say a word to you." I said okay. He then added, "I'll just walk up to you and shoot you in your pretty face." I was moving some things out and looked under the bed for a pair of shoes. Found his guns, fully loaded and out of their cases under his side of the bed. I went to the cops. Nothing came of it. Fast forward and he remarries before the ink is dry on the divorce. New wife shoots him in the head and kills him in his sleep. Proceeds to kill herself with his pain pills. Yeah. I sleep better these days. My uncle. We found out things in bits and pieces. My dad and he worked together. He got my dad fired by saying all sorts of lies to their boss, and then pretended to be the white knight by offering him a job in another country where he's living. Money was tight back then and we were in a lot of debt, so dad agreed. He took him there, gave him work, but also made him a slave to his wife and kids who also lived there. Dad was expected to cook food, wash the dishes, clean up the dining table after uncle's family ate, and then eat himself. Yes. Dad didn't tell us until much later. According to the rules set by uncle, he wasn't to contact us often, should mind his own damn business even if his daughter didn't turn up home all night, and keep his mouth shut about work. Dad was miserable there and we couldn't do much because, again, that job was a welcome relief to us. Uncle, meanwhile, would come every night to our home, have breakfast and dinner that my mom generously cooked because his family was abroad, while bitching about my dad in front of us. One day I had finally reached my breaking point and I started crying because I felt horrible for Dad who was trying so hard to make things right for us. Uncle just sat opposite to me smiling. Goddamn smiling. We'll never forget that psycho grin on his face. Days later Dad suddenly turned up unannounced at home. Turns out he'd been dumped by Uncle to our city without prior notice. Dad had no guts to tell us what happened. We realized Uncle was a psychopath later. He'd routinely mentally torture people and enjoy their misery while pretending to offer sympathies and help. He's in a powerful spot so he offers his victims jobs. Once they accept, he makes them entirely dependent on him. He'd then put his victims under even more psychological stress, be it threatening to cut off ties or getting them fired if they disagreed with him. My dad was really messed up for days. He'd swing from utter despair to not speaking for days to extreme violence to absolutely broken. Got beaten up a bit for trying to calm him down. Dad could finally regain his mental sanity after we cut off all ties to that uncle. Last we heard, he wants to contact my dad because their brothers and people realized what a piece of human excrement he is, so they avoid him too. Dad's like, oh hell nah. I remember from a very early age that my mom would just stand in the entrance to my room with a knife. This didn't happen very often, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. When I was 9, I finally asked her why she would do this. I'll never forget how she said this. She looked me dead in the eyes and said that I was a mistake and she was deciding if she should do what she should have done a long time ago. I asked to move in with my grandma a week later. Thinking about how she said it still gets my heart racing 22 years later. I don't know if I can accurately describe it, but every single hair on my body stood straight up. I was paralyzed with fear and I felt like if I moved too suddenly she would strike. Backstory: Mom had me when she was 16 and regularly told me that I ruined her life. She was a habitual drug user and alcoholic. She told me that if she had the money she would have had an abortion. I dated one a bit over a decade ago. He fits the description of a sociopath more than a psychopath, but he's also narcissistic. We dated on high school for a little over a year. Aside from the constant gaslighting, lies, manipulation and threats, he was basically a bad person who warped my mind so much that I actually believed I'd be nothing without him. Whether driving erratically with me in car when I questioned him, or threatening physical violence on me and my family if I broke up with him, he was truly terrifying by the end of our relationship. The absolutely most uncomfortable and terrifying moment was when he put a loaded hunting rifle in my face. He was addicted to weed. I don't believe weed's a dangerous drug at all, but he was so psychology warped that he believed he was going through severe physical and mental withdrawals if he went a day or two without smoking. One night he decided he was going to rob a small convenience store in his town for weed money. I stepped in front of his door to block his path and he pointed the gun at me. I bravely broke up with him a few days later, blocked him on social media, wouldn't answer his calls, and wouldn't answer the door when he showed up to my parents' house. It took months for him to get the point that I was serious. 12 years later and I still have nightmares of him. My sister feels nothing but rage. When she doesn't feel rage, she feels, literally, nothing. She spends her life manipulating everyone around her and satisfying that rage. She mercilessly abused me growing up. She tried to kill me 3 times before I moved out. No one believed me. Because I was older and larger, I was always considered to be the aggressor, even when I was being violently assaulted in my sleep. Living with her was a nightmare. The most uncomfortable moment between us wasn't something she did to me. It was something I considered doing to her. I'd been sent up to the crawl space to get an ornament. You could only access it from a ladder in the garage. When I grabbed it and turned around, she was at the top of the ladder, staring at me. There wasn't any room for her to come up, she was just waiting there. Staring. She told me to get out of the way, and I told her I couldn't. There wasn't room for 2 people in the crawl space. She'd have to go back down a ladder. She immediately switched to rage. She said she hated me, and she wasn't going to let me down from the crawl space. It was 110 degrees in there, and I was already exhausted. I remember thinking, she's at the top of a ladder, over a cement floor. I could make this stop. I'd just say it was an accident. I'm only 12. No one would convict me. As soon as I thought that, her face suddenly went blank, and she went back down a ladder. Thanks for listening to another Radio TTS episode about psychopaths. Hit the subscribe button and activate that bell to hear more stories like this. And please share your own stories in the comments below. Psychopaths get the job done, while others sit crying in a corner. Psychopaths, what's your day-to-day life like? Is the portrayal of psychopaths in media accurate to who you are? How do you interact with family and friends? By the way, ASPD means antisocial personality disorder. Same as everyone else, but without effective empathy? I utilize cognitive empathy to relate and interact with people. I live a normal life. I still work, go to college to study medicine, exercise, have hobbies, listen to music, etc. The media sensationalizes psychopathy a lot, and the typical portrayal is the serial killer, which in reality, are on the extreme end of the spectrum. Psychopathy is on a spectrum, and rare. The vast majority of functional psychopaths are camouflaged in society and are law-abiding citizens. The dysfunctional ones are in prisons. I think they make up 40% of the prison population versus 1 to 3% of the normal population. You'll find psychopaths in every industry and location around the world, and highly concentrated in careers that are in positions of power. My relationships with friends and family appear normal on the outside, but inside me, there is really no or very little emotional attachment. I really have zero problems in life today. Growing up, though, is a different story. It is easy to feign empathy and compassion with enough practice. For a long time I assumed I was normal, and the people who cried over things were overly dramatic and weird. When people died that I was close to, and I felt nothing, I started to question myself. Thought maybe I was just repressing or something. Saw a therapist and it was eventually clear that I'm just detached from everything that people should be attached to. Doesn't affect my life much. I probably distract myself from life more than the average person. I read a lot of books and stuff. Media sometimes portrays people like me as someone going out and murdering people and feeling no remorse and such. But I've never felt the need to harm anybody. Maybe out of curiosity when I was younger, to see if I would feel bad. But that question has already been answered, so there is no need. Socially it's odd sometimes. I just stay out of conversations that people get emotional about. I think I have very good opinions about controversial topics like abortion, religion, and politics in general, but my opinions seem to generally upset people. I don't think empathy is necessary to make positive improvements in society. I think it just makes me unbiased and logical. I think people probably like me, because I see people regularly. It's hard to tell though. I don't know why someone would ask to be around me if they didn't want to be around me. I like sports. I have found that I should probably not own pets though. I've had several fish in my life whose lives were rather short-lived, and I would imagine it would end the same for cats and dogs and such. Medication has shown no effect. There's not much to manage anyway. I'm not aggressive. Totally functional in day-to-day existence. In fact, I receive compliments on things like emotional stability, and ability to remain calm in stressful situations. The media does indeed sensationalize the condition to the point where every psychopath is portrayed as a killer. That's fine, but it's as relevant as any fairy story. I'm really not a killer, although murder is always on the menu of options as a solution to any particular problem. But even a psychopath knows that that is an extreme solution, like suicide. It ends the problem, but the planning is endless and the consequences are a pain. Interaction with family and friends is a matter of imitation of what those relationships should look like in order to deliver results. Duty and commitment are fantastic surrogates for love and loyalty. They look the same and can even be better, as duty and commitment can be demonstrated, driving Granny to the store for shopping every week, whereas love and loyalty are things that have to be felt. I can't feel them, but I know what they look like. Bereavement is a good test for you if you're in doubt. I see every loss as a relief, one less dragging ball and chain weighing me down and one less route for exposure. I know the facial expression to wear, but it's more convincing to play the rock, everyone's strength in times of woe and trauma. They think you bury your pain deep and stand as a pillar of strength for everyone around you. You get kudos for standing solid for everyone else. It's the perfect disguise for one who feels absolutely nothing. Basically, just like you do. It's about knowing which mask to put on at any given social interaction. I think psychopaths live much more consciously, for example, thinking before talking. It's hard to find one that will blurt out thoughts, unless there is an ADHD connection. For me it starts to make the world seem fake. Even though it is I who is the real fake. I am very in tune and will speak to what people want to hear, rather than what they should hear. Also, faking being an extrovert, when in reality I couldn't care less for social interaction, unless there is a purpose that will add value either to my own or those I care about. I think there are a lot of folks out there who show psychopathic behavior, but have not figured out they are psychopaths yet. Either that or societal norms are beginning to erode and this behavior has become semi-acceptable. The one main thing the media pushes is the fact that we cannot show empathy and have a hard time with social interactions. Maybe that is true and I can't speak for others, but in my case I can draw expected empathetic responses from previous social interactions. Social interactions are pretty easy too, because people are very predictable at their core and are very needy. I will normally let the other person divulge as much information as I can take in to formulate and engineer an interaction. Not always for self-gain. Sometimes it may be assisting in the removal of one's ego, or driving a conversation down a more logical, less emotional path. For others, does the above stand true for you? My day-to-day life is actually fairly normal. I wake up, do some work, care for my child. Everything that you would normally see a person do. Obviously, the media does not portray people with any personality disorder correctly. Borderlines are that psychotic ex-girlfriend. Don't date them cause as soon as you break up they will kill your next partner. And antisocials are just waiting for you to go to sleep with a knife behind their back. They are smiling sweetly as you eat their poison food. That being said, I have noticed in recent years much more conversation about this and I couldn't be happier with that. I watched the Shane Dawson documentary and people were outraged by how sensationalized it is. ASPD individuals were called gross and people left and right were commenting with things like, "I am glad you think I'm gross," or "Thanks, good to know you find my mom disgusting." It was extremely nice to see. Despite popular belief, we do actually care what people think of us. No one wants to live life alone and isolated. It's the entire reason we try to blend in. And to be honest, the most hurtful thing I have ever done to anyone wasn't physical but emotional. I was also extremely young, being abused by my parents and needed to see someone upset because I didn't feel upset but knew that I should. I have never had a desire to hurt anyone. The main difference comes from my capacity to feel emotion. My emotions are like a level field, however once in a while I will have a peak. It doesn't last long. If I get sad it's over as quickly as it began and often surfaced as just disappointment. I also can feel remorse, not in any capacity that you would understand. I once cheated on a partner and when he found out I was far more upset that he found out and I had to deal with that conversation than I was that he was crying. In fact, him crying made me smile. I had to shove his head down into my chest in order to stop him from seeing. I also lack empathy for others, especially stupid people, and I often find it very annoying when others get emotional. I am of the personal belief that empathy and sympathy are two very different things. I can't empathize but I can sympathize. Though I have learned when I am supposed to empathize with others and what the appropriate actions are for those situations. Since you are asking about friends and family, I'll say it's difficult for me to care about people or be relatively close to them, though there are many people that fully believe I am a great friend of theirs. Typically, for me to be able to care about someone, a grand gesture of support needs to occur. They need to show me that they care first, and even then my caring back just may not happen. For me to keep anyone around, it needs to be useful to me in some way. I see absolutely no point in caring for or entertaining someone who doesn't have something to give me. It is extremely easy for me to write someone off. I do have people that I love, and like I heard this author say in an interview, don't be a love snob. Just because I don't experience love the same way that you do doesn't mean it's not real to me. You may not be able to relate to the way someone with ASPD feels in that regard, but you shouldn't ever diminish them either. Just know that I am sure there are plenty on the side of the spectrum that can't care at all. It's not been my experience. We are not robots. We are humans. Most of my friends and family know about my disorder, and I've personally found that if I tell them before they notice something is a little off, they handle it better. It tends to dispel this myth that everyone in our lives are only a plaything and we are just manipulating everything. And while yes, I can be extremely manipulative because I don't get wound up in emotions like everyone else and know how to easily use those emotions to get someone in the direction I want them. It doesn't mean that I am doing it all of the time. In fact, I try to do it only when needed. And in fact, feeling emotions less than others can also hinder me to grow attached to them. In terms of romantic relations, I personally have only had long-term relationships, though I have struggled with infidelity in the past many years ago. Now I stick to my moral code, and it's much better to control my impulses. Sex is like a high for me. It's the one time that I can feel everything fully, and because of that I've decided to only share it with people that I love. Since I can't feel as strongly normally, I figure those emotions should be kept for the one I am in a relationship with. That being said, I've only been in love with one man, though I have tried to love others. No one has presented me with enough challenges to keep me from getting bored and straying, or leaving altogether, except him. Boredom is extremely easy to come by in my experience, and if a partner can't keep me on my toes, it doesn't work out. I will start to push and do things on purpose to upset them, to just feel something. And once that has happened one too many times, with forgiveness I lose all respect for that person. Once my respect is gone, we are pretty much over. You aren't gonna get it back. The thing is though, each person with ASPD is probably gonna give you different answers. Like I said, It's a spectrum and each experiences it in their own way, just like with any other mental health issue. Some people with depression can function and no one knows, and others can't even get out of bed in the morning. It's no different here. I can't think of anything else here, but hopefully you found my answers helpful. It's a minor personality variance on a spectrum. Don't forget they are likely to be normal with everything else. They live normal lives, often quite successful lives. Stressful situations with life or death decisions are often the most significant to survival, like in medicine or warfighting. It is a useful trait we will not evolve out of our genes. If a person is more disconnected from gore or horrific emotional trauma, they cope for longer. A lack of empathy saves thousands of lives every year, as the more psychopathic individuals have to get the job done, while others sit crying in a corner somewhere. Humanity didn't get anywhere without spilling a little blood. Who better to do it than those with an inbuilt defense against emotional ties? In media, psychopath is a synonym for murderer. A psychopath is more capable of getting away with murder because of the rational thinking and consistent acting. They will be less sorry for what they have done, which leads to longer sentences. However, most murders are caused by extreme emotional states between those who care or irreparably emotionally intertwined. Psychopaths learn to be excellent actors at a very young age. So many performances of emotional care are expected. Here's Grandma. Aren't you happy to see Grandma? Even as a toddler you can hardly answer truthfully and say no. It's not the done thing, so instead we pretend to be over the moon to see this random old lady we are familiar with because we have learned, early on, it hurts people's feelings to tell them the truth. If the truth hurts people's complex feelings, it is best avoided. Romantic relationships are doubly hard when you have lust but no emotional ties and have to create a facade of love. It becomes saddening when you see that your acting efforts weren't good enough because they began questioning if you care at all. You like and you care just to keep them around, for they are a spark in life, and if you just try a bit harder, you may feel the love you see they have. Family relationships are less strained as that love can be rationalized as unconditional, so your actions and apparent coldness towards them won't end at all. Token gifts of normal emotional behaviors for good family relationships are doled out to effect some response on occasion, or to meet societal norms. To tell family or partners the truth would crush them. To know you enjoy them, but if they just popped out of existence you'd probably go make a coffee and carry on with your life without shedding a tear. Unless the guilt of not caring breaks you and you cry for that reasons but not for the love, or someone is watching so the act of caring must go on, or what will they think of you? Psychopaths are not emotionless. They feel their emotions for themselves and recognize them in others, but connecting the two is harder. They struggle to see why people carry all this emotional baggage, and they decide to copy along, pretending to carry bags, imitating their gait, posture and speed, lest the normal folk notice they are baggage-free and start trying to shove theirs onto you. Is pretending to care when you don't moral? Is telling others you don't care if they die more moral? Neither are good options. It's damned if you do or damned if you don't. Instead, the grand act goes on: pretend to be like everyone else or face up to being very slightly different and effectively be labeled a serial killer, mass murdering sadist, because you are carefree, truly independent and capable of anything. I am undiagnosed but pretty sure at the very least a sociopath. To answer your questions, my life is pretty normal, except that I don't have real friends of my own. I don't feel the need to be close to anyone, but I have sort of been adopted by my wife's friends circle. When it comes to my wife and daughter, I tell them I love them every day, several times a day. I do all I can to look after them, and if you ask my wife she will tell you that I fulfill her every need even before she knows she needed something. Deep down though, I know that if she said to me tomorrow that she met someone new and want to move on, I would not for a second cause drama or try to stop her. I don't have feelings about people dying. I wouldn't hurt anyone. I believe humanity needs to live in harmony for growth and preservation. Death is part of life. As some others have said, I keep a cool head during stressful times and can take calculated reactions when other people go into panic. When it comes to friends, I don't have any type of attachment to people, hence not having my own friends. I do feel that I am doing something right when I see my wife and daughter happy, so I guess I have some sort of empathy. I generally treat people with respect. I don't like bullies or people being mean to each other. Thanks for listening to another Radio TTS video about psychopaths. I hope you liked this one as much as I did, as it does help to clear the misconceptions about psychopathy. Anyway, hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. Share your own thoughts in the comments. Warning: this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. It was two couples who decided to kill, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. Lawyers, at what point did you realize my client is a monster? A lot of years ago I used to work as a solicitor's representative. Cases go to Crown Court, barrister deals and I am there for paperwork, additional stuff with client etc. 70-something-year-old man had been in jail for 15 years for an assault on a child. Solicitor and barrister working on getting him released due to him getting clean reports from just about everyone. Guards took him out of jail to a dentist, and as he entered the waiting room he saw two children and ran straight at them. Guards stopped him. 3 weeks later at court I was the one that sat him down in a room to explain that no, this isn't a hearing to release you. It is so you can be committed to a mental health secure facility for the rest of your life. He didn't take that well. I shed no tears. Not the client but my managing partner. The client was a senile 90-year-old man. He wanted to sell land worth a little less than $1 billion to some businessmen. Suffice to say there were many who wanted to take advantage of the situation. One such person, to my dismay, was our managing partner. The partner wanted to insert a provision that would have effectively funneled about 60% of the proceeds solely to him. You could see how his eyes gleamed at the mere mention of money. The provision got lost in the revisions. I was doing the revisions. I'm no longer part of that scummy firm. I'm on the other side, but I've got a defendant who went to prison for starving 3 adopted children to the point that they needed weeks of hospitalization. Then got out of prison and married a guy with children so that she could start starving them too. Listening to her interview where she attempts to justify what she did to both sets of kids, disturbed me more than any of the murder cases I've worked on. Her justification was, she did nothing wrong, she was just trying to help them be healthy and beautiful. She felt bad for the first set of kids because they needed her, etc. It wasn't my case, but I've seen the pictures. The first set of kids looked like Holocaust survivors. They were 4 to 5 and she had them completely brainwashed to think only she would ever love them. We had a client try and enforce a post-employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to make her life hell because she wouldn't sleep with him, a creepy 57-year-old man. Him trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim and so we ended up sending him elsewhere. I listened to a 911 call where the victim's throat was slit while on the call by our client. I will never forget her gurgling and sounding like she was dying. Somehow she ultimately lived through this, saying, "He killed me, he killed me." She tried to sell her baby. I found out during a hearing, in front of the judge. This is called child laundering. There are tons of kids up for adoption, but relatively few babies. Adoption agencies make so much money granting babies to couples that can't conceive their own, that there have been cases of getting them from gray sources. The eventual families often have no idea. Intercountry adoption in the United States is responsible for most intercountry adoptions in the world, 20,000 out of the total 30,000 total orphans adopted annually. The Westerners who adopt from developing nations pay thousands of dollars to process the paperwork of one child. This provides a lucrative incentive for those involved in the process. I had a teacher in high school who was a former lawyer. We always asked him why he gave up his practice to start teaching. He finally caved and explained that his last case was the defense of 3 people. Apparently there had been a 4th. It was 2 couples, who in the act of a drunken, drugged-out orgy, decided to kill, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time. As a lawyer, he said it was pretty open and shut, but he had to get his clients the best result possible, and he was exposed to all the horrid details, the pictures, and their reasoning. My teacher had such a far-off look when he explained it that we could see it really got to him. If I recall, he said something about them saying, "She wasn't right," or along those lines. And, the other detail that I remember was the body parts were put into trash bags, and then into an oil drum. My mom is a lawyer. This is the story about how she quit being a public defender. When you are a public defender you don't get to choose your cases. She got assigned a young man who, with the help of his girlfriend, had gotten a kitten from a free to a good home ad in the paper. They then brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So yeah. She said she needed a shower after every meeting with him. Cancelled her PD contract after the case concluded. I've done a lot of prison legal aid, and I could tell stories about child molesters that would turn you green, but instead I'll turn you green a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, good athlete, got a girlfriend and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do. I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case, but this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out inside. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, shovels, hose, to chop her body up and bury it in the corn and went home like nothing had happened. Had a divorced client, husband and father, who disowned his autistic son, tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years, contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and me in Manhattan, saying he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day while the storm slammed NYC. He told me I was making a huge mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it. I could go on. But the worst was when, several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threat letters to myself and my wife saying that he had hired an executor to kill the two of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. Called the police and they said he left his premises one day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014, when he emailed me saying he needed a winter coat from his wife and could I help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he killed himself before the judge signed the judgment of divorce. I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now he's got a terrible history, but so do a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled, also typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal. So I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, a butthole, but whatever, not the worst. What did it was his counteroffer. I ain't paying that bitch's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window. Criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat, these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I most practice white collar and federal now. Number 1. I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He has driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. Number 2. Client who was accused of molesting a 12-year-old. He was mid-40s at the time and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming onto him. Number 3. I represented a woman for a grand theft charge. Left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things. Number 4. I had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beats up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy so hard his eyeball popped out. I thought, this guy deserves to be in prison. Took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost and he got 10, the max. Number 5. Client who pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the Gov, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. My girlfriend's mother, Elle, was abusive. She frequently hit her husband, was a compulsive liar, and just generally made her family miserable. When they were settling the divorce, the judge initially deemed a testimony from the kids, my girlfriend and her brother, unnecessary, probably because they were minors at the time and testifying against one of their parents would be hard on them, to say the least. However, the lawyer representing Elle was really insistent that they testify. Well, it must have been a shock to the lawyer to suddenly have 2 more witnesses with dozens of accounts of driving under the influence, domestic violence, etc. We figured Elle must have lied to her lawyer about some significant details because they were completely caught off guard and more than a little angry after the testimony. We like to believe it helped solidify some of the criminal charges placed against her. It was a nice bit of karma after years and years of gaslighting and false rumors, that her own lies got her caught. Attorney's wife here. I used to help him file away evidence and reports. Came across a file with video. Curiosity got the better of me, especially when husband told me not to watch it. File gives this story: woman was at boyfriend's trailer out in the middle of nowhere, got pissed off at boyfriend, so smacked him in the head with a metal bat and went on her merry way home. Boyfriend is apparently not a pleasant person, and nobody really misses him or looks for him. He is fired from work in absentia. On day 7, boyfriend's neighbor finally stops by, hears horse screaming and calls police. That's where the video came from. Day 7. One of the cops was wearing a camera on his uniform. It shows him and his partner going through the house, finding dog poop all over the floor. Boyfriend's 2 Rottweilers, who were also in the house, went without food for about 6 days before they started eating bits and pieces of him. The camera shows the moment the cop found the body on its side, rolled it over. And he's blinking. Eyes open. With most of his face gone. The woman didn't even bother to let the dogs out before she left. I do not help file cases anymore. My first internship in law school was at a matrimonial law firm in a very wealthy area. Think millionaires and billionaires getting divorced. One of the first cases I worked on involved the parents of a victim of a high-profile school shooting. The parents were divorced and had been prior to the death of the child, and were now battling over who would get the victim's compensation fund money and the funds they received from a fundraiser they set up themselves on a GoFundMe type site. These were incredibly wealthy people fighting over what was literal chump change to them and asking the public to donate to them as if they needed it. They were so clearly exploiting the death of their child for money and to piss off the other parent. It was honestly one of the most disturbing things I have encountered, ever. Not a lawyer, but worked for a law firm as an investigator. One of our clients stabbed an ex-lover multiple times over $100. Perp then ran out of the house all bloody. Neighbor and her teenage daughter see him covered in blood and rush inside to see if they can help while they call 911. Victim is still alive. On the 911 call the daughter made, you can hear the mom singing Amazing Grace while she tried to stop the bleeding. You can also hear the victim, with a stab wound in her neck, gurgling on blood while she tries to sing along. The EMTs arrived in under 3 minutes, but it took the police 19 minutes from the call to show up to clear the scene for them. She lived for 17 minutes. I saw the photos of the scene with the body still in place. It looked like a scene straight from Dexter. Not a defendant, but a divorce. Client is a late 30s woman, 2 kids, idyllic suburban life with her incredibly lucrative medical profession, husband. He caught her cheating. He wanted to patch things up. She decided on a divorce. So far, nothing out of the ordinary, unfortunately. Then I start getting the details. He caught her on his birthday. In their bed. While the kids were downstairs. He decided to come home early as a surprise, and his wife was having sex, a 19-year-old. But wait. There's more. Really fun stuff from the husband. The guy had been treated for gonorrhea twice, and both times he had caught it from his wife. The second kid wasn't his. It was obvious because the child was 100% some race, and the dad was not that race. Bad stuff, right? Well, enter the texts, emails, etc. She was carrying on like a dozen affairs at any given time. Spanning years. She would bring them home, and tell the kids they were electricians, plumbers, etc. She'd have sex with other guys within minutes of dropping her kids off at school. I've met some awful people in my time, but this woman straight up told me how much this guy loved her and how she manipulated the hell out of him. He knew about a lot of the stuff, and each time he found something new he just tried to win her back. I don't want to go into the details of what happened, but some money that you get you don't really want. I saw this play out in court. Plaintiff was a prison guard who was pressured and forced to have sex and oral sex with her boss, the warden, on a number of occasions. The warden threatened to have her fired and blackballed if she refused or blew the whistle. After this carried on for a long while, she quit and filed a lawsuit. But unfortunately her idiot lawyer didn't timely file with the correct authorities. At the end of the day, her claim was barred and the warden enjoyed sovereign immunity. At the hearing, you could see the judge asking the prison guard questions to see if there was a workaround or some way for her complaint to survive the pending motion to dismiss. But there wasn't. That was hard to watch. It was even worse when the prison guard began to quietly cry. Fortunately the warden wasn't at the hearing, and the attorney representing the state was professional and just focused on the legal arguments. He dipped out of the hearing in a hurry. Lifelong criminal defense lawyer here. To be completely honest, it's not about the offense but about the person. I've had people accused of murder that I really kind of liked and thought well off. I've had people accused of shoplifting who have given me the heebie-jeebies and seemed like psychopaths. Speaking from purely a criminal standpoint, having a client who is a monster doesn't matter in terms of your duty to them. But it does make the job less pleasant. My worst clients have been people who are comfortable scamming others off their money. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button for more videos about psychopaths, cults, and other dark corners of humanity. Share your own court story in the comments below. Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. I turned around a split second before a Golf driver smashed me in the back of the skull. Primary school teachers, what is the most shocking display of psychopath-like behavior you've seen? A grade 1 student said he had killed 2 bunnies and some birds. He wrote about it in his journal, and drew a picture. Sure enough, the carcasses were found in the playground at recess. When we asked him why he did it, he said he wanted to know what it would feel like to kill something. My wife is a teacher. About 10 years ago, a student took apart a pencil sharpener and removed the razor blade, cut a groove in the back of a pencil, slid the razor into it, used rubber bands to secure it, and tried to slice her with it. My pregnant sister-in-law works with a child who is pretty crazy. He doesn't take his meds some days and he will often draw pictures of killing things and blood everywhere. Sometimes he'll tell the teachers, "This is you and there is blood everywhere." Ha ha ha. The other day she was helping him and he was frustrated, so he stabbed her with a pencil. And then right after that went to hit her stomach and she deflected the hit and said, "You can't hit. Especially my stomach. Do you know why?" And the freaking kid goes, "Yeah, 'cause you have a baby in there. I hope it dies." This kid is in 1st grade. Oh dear, where to begin? Here's one that comes to mind. Kindergarten girl had a pair of scissors. I turned just in time to see her reach over and try to cut off another girl's ponytail. Not a major thing, because no cutting actually happened, but when I asked her why she was going to do that, because they normally got along very well, she said, in a simple, very straightforward tone of voice. Because her hair is what she loves the most. Sent chills up my spine. I'm not a teacher myself, but my best friend works as a teaching assistant in a small primary school. She used to tell me about a little boy who would constantly give death stares to teachers and would generally refuse to interact with other children. My friend absolutely loves kids, but even she admitted she had never seen a child look so angry all of the time, like he hated the world even though he was so young. He would face the wall during class time and repeatedly bash his head against the wall until staff intervened. He started biting a lot of the children and was told off for doing so in the dining hall one day. He then jabbed the dinner lady in the arm with his fork so hard that it drew blood. In my friend's classroom they had a small incubator with little chicks in, that the children would help to look after and watch as they grew up. At one point he was left unattended and managed to squeeze one of the poor chicks to death. I don't know whatever happened with him because my friend got a job at another school, but the story has always stuck in my mind. The way she described him genuinely gave me chills. Went to school with a kid who enjoyed mumbling crazy things to himself all during class and in the hallways. Always felt bad for the guy and did my best to be nice to him. Then he regularly got caught writing hit lists and threatening to kill girls because none of them loved him. My wife is a substitute teacher. I dropped her off to teach 2nd grade class in a downtown elementary school. These kids were the angriest students she ever met, and she used to teach in NYC. The moment class started they beat the ever-living crap out of each other, to the point that there was clumps of hair on the ground. She was also 6 months pregnant and one student ran into her belly causing her to cry. She had called the office over and eventually said she wouldn't work in this class. They switched her to 1st grade. Yeah, better right? Nope. They were worse. She threatened to move the temperature down on the behavior thermometer if they continue, which she eventually followed through. This caused Meltdown City. They actually threw a desk at her, 1st grade kid throwing a desk at a pregnant lady. When I picked her up she burst into tears and was shaking. She said if she had driven there herself she would have just left. I wish she would have called me. I would have left work to get her. Took that school off the subcall list. A guy in my primary school once snuck up behind the teacher and cut her ponytail off. The same kid also threw our pet hamster against the wall and then stomped his foot on its head. This killed the hamster. 1st grade boy, about 7 years old, Ginger, chubby, pretty cute little dude, sitting fairly quietly at his desk. I looked closer and he is slowly pressing the point of his pencil into the top of his hand, then lifting it to see the indentation it has made in his skin. He does this a number of times, pressing a little harder each time. Then he looks over at the kid next to him, who is quietly writing in his workbook, one hand flat on the table in front of him, and bang! He stabs his pencil into the top of the other kid's hand. Cue instant screaming from the poor little guy, who all of a sudden has a pencil solidly standing up in his skin, and little ginger guy is just sitting there looking slightly baffled at the crying, but entirely pleased as punch. My wife is a teacher and I volunteered in her class. I want to say this was her first grade class, but it could have been kindergarten. Anyways, one little girl was just messed up. Really bad family life and all that. She didn't know how to speak normally. She always yelled everything. A few times that year, she just started throwing desks and chairs. She would routinely just talk crap about people for no reason. Whenever I volunteered there, she called me ugly, bald, and fat in the span of 2 hours, running away after each insult. She was just a really mean, messed up child. Back in 6th grade, we had a cage of guinea pigs and a tank of fish that we had groups assigned to look after them. Groups would be rotated, so that everyone at some point had a chance to look after the class pets. There was one kid, let's call him PJ, and his group was assigned to the guinea pigs. One morning just as class is starting, we see one of the guinea pigs floating at the top of the fish tank, dead. We were all pretty distraught, all being 11. Except for PJ. He didn't try to deny it, but when asked about it, he stared our teacher in the eyes and said, "I just wanted to see how it looked while it struggled to survive." From then on, the classrooms were locked until the teachers opened them. PJ was made to go to the counselor after that. This was back in 2001. PJ added me on Facebook a few months ago. By all accounts he seems normal now. But yeah, certainly had the short odds for class psycho back then. Not a teacher, but have been in childcare on and off for years. I worked the daycare at a gym in high school, and there I met the two most psycho kids I've ever met before or since. Keep in mind that I was daycare director for a homeless mission at one point too. Lots of kids coming in with issues. But no, two spoiled rich kids at the gym were the worst. The first was Brad. Brad has a younger brother and sister, both dark-haired and petite, both very smart and kind. Brad was their opposite in every way. He was huge for his age, blonde, of average intelligence and pure evil. I had to pry him off of other kids all the time. His younger siblings were constantly covered in bruises because he would beat on them mercilessly. Several bite and bruise reports were written because of this kid. He drew awful pictures of blood and guts coming out of people, said evil things like, "One day I'll get big enough that no one can stop me from hurting people." Once, I left to use the restroom, leaving only 5 kids in the care of my assistant, and the moment I left, Brad got another kid in a headlock and my assistant couldn't get him off. This is a 5-year-old we're talking about. Full-grown adult couldn't get him off this other kid. Staff started screaming for me, but before I could get my pants up, the other kid passed out from lack of air. Huge problems ensued, of course. Parents were told they couldn't bring Brad back. Both absolute spoiled brats, but I didn't know the extent of Jessica's issues until I started babysitting them at home as well. They lived in a bi-level, or split-level, house. The kind where the main living area is half a flight up from the front door, usually a bedroom, living room, and utility area is half a flight down with a sunken garage attached. Their house was just like this. These girls were so spoiled that, at 6 and 7, the bottom floor was entirely theirs. They had their own living room, bathroom, and bedroom, complete with leather furniture and the latest big screen TVs. At some point, they had to move the younger one's bedroom into a curtained-off corner of the living room because Jessica kept trying to smother her in her sleep. They had a dog, and the parents warned me to keep it outside or away from Jessica at all times. Why? They had already been through 2 cats, a few hamsters, and several fish, all of which Jessica killed in one way or another. She had been known to cut, beat, and burn the poor dog, but they wouldn't find it another home. Once, neither wanted to eat the disgusting-looking casserole that their mom had left for dinner. No biggie, I made them sandwiches with veggies and fruit instead. This is the point that I should mention that Jessica was very obese for her age. After eating 2 adult-sized sandwiches, and everything else, she wanted more food. I told her that she'd had plenty for the moment, maybe we'd have a snack in a little while and watch a movie. This sent her into an absolute rage, kicking, screaming, banging her head, the works. Bro, I sent her stomping off to her room downstairs. About a minute later, I'm at the sink with my back to the stairs and I hear a squeak of floorboards. I turned around a split second before a golf driver, the old solid wood kind, smashed me in the back of the skull. This girl had gone downstairs, and in less than a minute, decided to get one of her dad's golf clubs out of the garage, sneak back upstairs, and brain me with it. The whole time laughing her head off about how no one would miss me when I died. I stopped watching them after that, but years later, when they would have been 11 and 10, I saw them at Target in the Halloween Island. Jessica full-on punched her mother in the face over a costume wig. The mom already had one black eye and her younger sister just stood there silently immune to her sister's rages. A friend of mine used to teach kids with behavioral issues. She was about 7 months pregnant when one of the kids decided she didn't want her to have the baby. She waited until the teacher's aide walked out of the room to attack her. Pushed her to the ground and started kicking her stomach as hard as she could. Other students started yelling and helped pull her away. My friend almost lost the baby and had to go on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. She had a healthy baby. The scary and sad part is the girl was 8 years old. Surprisingly for me, my friend went back to teaching this class. I taught first grade and had a student who was in trouble so often that I had to send a daily report to his parents about his behavior. A few instances of his behavior were as follows. He once tripped a kid at recess for no reason, and then began kicking him hard in the stomach. By the time I had gotten over there, he was calmly sitting on the other child's head. When I asked him why he did it, he replied, "I was tired." That confused me, so I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "Well, I don't see any benches around, do you?" I had to sit on something. He had a special seat at my back table and he would mutter to himself while I was teaching. One day I had my assistant read to the class so I could quietly stand behind him and listen to what he was saying. All I heard was "Bew, bew, bew." Later, I took him aside and asked him what he was doing. He told me he was playing video games in his head and shooting everyone because kids were worth 200 points. I had a third grader bring a pack of razor blades to school on my first day. I pulled him outside the room, sat on the railing and said, "Hey, I'd like to understand why you did this." He calmly looked me in the eye and said he wanted to sharpen his pencils. I said people don't usually use razor blades to sharpen pencils, but I could think of a few reasons someone might bring razor blades to school. Maybe you wanted to hurt someone, or you were afraid someone would hurt you, or you thought they were cool and wanted to show them to your friends. He said they're to cut up my food. Still totally calm. He got suspended for 1 day. To all appearances, he was a well-adjusted, smart kid who got along with his classmates. I did notice that every time I tried to watch him out of the corner of my eye to get some insight into his personality, he immediately noticed and started watching me out of the corner of his eye. This isn't usually the case with little kids. He could also turn his emotions on and off like flipping a light switch. He never seemed to lose control, never acted angry, never cried. Would sometimes get happy for a second or two, but tended to catch himself and stop. I still have no idea what to think. Well, at one of the schools I work at, I heard about a 9 or 10-year-old kid who would get caught masturbating in empty classrooms very often. I am not sure of the details, but when his teacher was getting observed by someone from the district sitting in the back of her classroom, very standard routine, the kid was in the front row jerking off and giving her a strange look. I guess none of the other kids seemed to notice, although that is hard for me to believe. She ended up finishing her lesson and not saying anything to the district representative. I have no idea how it was handled after. However, come to find out, his parents were going through a divorce and his father was a cross-dresser and would bring home a lot of different men. I am not sure if this had any effect on his behavior, but I can't imagine it was the easiest thing for him to handle. Sorry, I don't have much more information than that. Last week a student in my special ed class threw an apple very hard directly at one of our paraprofessionals' head. The apple hit her hard and I immediately called my vice principal. When the vice principal arrived, I asked, "Well, you didn't mean to hit her, right?" To which he replied, "That's exactly where I was aiming, it was a good throw." Last year he took a razor blade and cut a classmate's leg open with it. He was sent to an alternative school for 2 months and he ended up back at my school. Kid scares the hell out of me. I truly Honestly believe that my cousin is a psychopath. From grade school on. Even from birth on. Even when he was breastfeeding he would bite his mom until she bled. Not your normal teething bites. It made him happy. As he got older he would take joy in beating our mentally retarded cousin with bats. That was about ages 2 to 14. His parents would always say that it was just a phase. When he was about 5 his dad would lift his arm up and punch him as hard as he could below the armpit to toughen him up. He was later sent to military school and kicked out. When he returned home he killed 4 stray cats, took them to the local Chinese restaurant, threw the dead cats at them and said, "Cook him up." He's now addicted to heroin and constantly in and out of jail. I had a babysitter once that invited him over, unbeknownst to me. He left before I got back or knew about it. Soon enough my 1-year-old started choking and I pulled weed stems out of her throat. That was a bad day for them. I'm waiting for the day he kills someone. It shouldn't be long now. My mother works as an aide at our local public elementary school, and last year one of her charges was a severely mentally ill, 8-year-old girl. This girl's parents both had mental illnesses of some sort, and the mom did drugs while she was pregnant, which surely didn't help. As a result, the girl was clearly a very disturbed individual. She self-harmed, had the tendency to scream and run away at random times, and when she got angry, which was often, her voice would go cold as ice. "I hate you," she would say. She was very intelligent, but also a pathological liar, very depressed and angry, and extremely violent and sadistic. Once, she confided to my mother, "I think that the color of my blood is beautiful. Can I see your blood?" She would often throw paint or stinging insects on other students, hit and kick the teacher's aides, and attempt to kill other children who she was angry at. Fortunately, an 8-year-old girl is restrainable. Basically, she was turning out to be a textbook psychopath. Her parents even bought her a BB gun in hopes that it would help her, which is the last thing I do. My mother said she had never seen such a miserable, hate-filled little girl. Now, you'd think that surely one of the teachers would notice the girl's mental illness and intervene. But that's apparently not how it works. All of the school staff, including the principal, knew that this child did not belong in the mainstream classroom, and that she desperately needed professional therapy. But, legally, they could not place her in a more appropriate setting without parental consent. They can suggest things to the parents, but if the parents decide not to get treatment for the child, there's really nothing the teachers can do about it. The problem is that the mom was a mentally ill drug addict who was constantly in and out of jail, and dad, while he meant well, had a touch of autism and refused to believe that his darling daughter was capable of such outbursts. So, although it broke the teachers' hearts that this girl's mental illness was being left untreated, they legally had no other choice but to put up with her in the mainstream classroom. Finally, after about a year of classroom disruptions, attempted escapes, and beating up teachers, the principal finally videotaped one of the girl's violent outbursts, and the father was finally convinced that his daughter needed help. With his permission, she was transferred to a special school district program where mentally ill kids can get one-on-one help without disrupting or harming the other students. I've heard that she's doing quite well there, and is steadily becoming less and less violent. Hopefully, she'll continue to improve. I was a preschool teacher a few years ago in a toddler room with 2-year-olds, and there was this adorable kid, very smart but psycho. I had to fill out an average of 3 incident reports a day on him, that had to be signed by a parent when he was picked up at the end of the day, and they just shrugged or made him apologize, which did nothing to deter him. This kid's father was in and out of jail for assault and drug-related charges, and his mom was pretty much useless. He told me on several occasions, while holding a toy broom, that he was going to beat me with the broom until I bled and cried. He often attacked other kids for no reason. He used to tell one of the little girls that he was going to have sex with her. He called all teacher bitches when he was upset. Basically, this kid was nuts. I brought up the issues to my manager and the owner several times, and they did nothing. So after 6 months of being this kid's punching bag and have my legs and arms covered in bruises and scratches, I quit. I didn't give them any notice. I walked into the office, told them I quit, and then grabbed my stuff and got the hell out. I am a teacher in Alaska. I knew a kindergarten, age 5, student that constantly terrorized the class, pet bunny named Lady. All forms of consequences and punishments did not work with this kid. He began to anticipate Lady's movement and escape paths. So one day he scared her and she went running to her safe spot behind the couch. He beat her to the couch, lifted the edge of it, and then slammed it down on her with precision so that she was pinned under the leg. Kids went running around screaming and crying as Lady was actually vocalizing a tortured squeal, a sound we had never heard. Once she stopped, the kid jumped on the couch to make her squeal again, but it was too late. She had passed. Thanks for listening to another dark episode of Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the bell for more topics no one wants to talk about. Share your own stories about evil kids who fit in the same category as the ones in the posts. He was standing over me watching me sleep. He was holding a large kitchen knife. People who've almost died because of a psychopath, what's your story? I guess this doesn't really count as almost died, but it was an unsettling moment nonetheless. In high school I started dating this new girl, we'll call her Nicole. She had mentioned that she was somewhat recently out of a relationship and that her ex might be a problem as he wouldn't leave her alone, we'll call him Rory. She was dreading getting all her stuff back from him because she didn't even want to see him. Our typical routine after a few weeks of dating was to finish school, jump in my car, head to her place and hang out until her parents got home. It was the usual sex first and then a lot of TV watching, mostly MTV. So one day we're watching MTV and there's a knock at her door. She opens the door and it's Rory, and he's very angry. Turns out he had seen my car there for about a week and figured it was a new guy, so he waited outside her house to confirm and then busted us hanging out. Things got heated between them pretty fast with Rory yelling and screaming the standard "nobody will love you like I did. How could you? We promised each other forever." Now, I noticed from where I was sitting that Rory was a little guy. Someone I could easily take in a fight. I decided it was better to not even approach the situation as I didn't want to have to get involved. After Rory screamed for what felt like 10 minutes, enough was enough and I went over and asked him to leave. He told me he'd kill me, and Nicole said, "Rory, you're acting crazy," and without missing a beat he put his hands on his hips and said, "You want to see crazy? This is crazy," and proceeded to pee himself right in front of us. Neither of us knew what to do. This guy was just peeing his pants like it was a crime against us. Nicole slammed the door shut and Rory walked off. Or so we thought. About 30 minutes later we hear fire trucks and there's a smashing knock at her door. It's the fire department. The big oak tree right in front of her house is burning up like crazy. Like, full-on inferno. It was amazing the house didn't catch fire and even more amazing that we hadn't noticed anything. There was smoke everywhere but not in the house. Rory was already in the back of a police car. Turns out he brought all of her stuff that he still had with him, and after we shut the door he climbed the tree and put all her stuff on different branches, climbed down, and set the tree on fire. The guy was off his meds or something. That was a crazy day. Someone kidnapped me, that I was trying to escape from that I'd been in a relationship with. He found me outside of a night class and convinced me to get in a car, started driving fast and took me to an isolated area, kept driving all night telling me all the ways he could kill me. He drove onto train tracks and sat there, said he would kill us that way. Drove at high speeds on the highway and rural area, making close calls, threatening to drive off cliffs, into guardrails, body of water. I let him take me home where he locked me in his room and I pretended like I loved him and had sex with him. He finally left the house and locked me in, but I escaped and I messed things up. Told his family. I found all this stuff while I was locked in his room. He had copies of my personal info and all my family that he'd made when he'd come to my home. When I was locked in, I found a number of his old girlfriend, and called him from a phone in the room. I found crazy lists of the two of us comparing everything about us. It was insane. Including gifts for Christmas that were the same, birthday. All sorts of weird lists. I expect he is a serial killer now. I was around 17 at the time. We had a 2-story house that had an in-law apartment. Upstairs was ours, downstairs was half garage half apartment, that we would rent out. The tenant had a daughter that wasn't quite right in the head, and she hated me. I have no idea why. I never said anything to her, but she didn't like me one bit. If she ever saw me she would run inside and blast music so loud, I learned the words to the songs. There was a staircase that led from the upstairs where I lived, into the garage where there was a sink, washer and dryer that the tenants could use. One day I started down the stairs and suddenly slipped and grabbed the arm rail to save myself. There was liquid soap all over the stairs. I told my ma, who asked the tenant about it and told her if it wasn't for the arm rail I would have slid down the stairs. Turns out the daughter did it. Hold on, I'm not done yet. A week or so goes by and I head down the stairs and the stairs are soapy again, this time mixed with some water to make it even more slippy. I'm ready this time and grab onto the rail, but wouldn't you know it, she soap up the rail this time. In a world without friction I slid down the stairs at Mach 3 and at the end of the stairs is a nice soft wall of concrete. I managed to tuck my head in a way so that my back took most of the hit. Still whacked my head enough to lose some brain cells. I wouldn't have made good use of them anyway. This time my ma was upset about the whole thing and they only stayed there for another month or two and moved out. My ex thought it would be funny to suffocate me with a pillow, or to choke me till I passed out. At the end of the relationship I woke up in the ICU of a hospital after he tried to kill me by poisoning me. He told everyone that I did it myself and they believed him. I truly believe he is a sociopath. He also tried to kill my cat, probably did, since I never saw my cat again. I used to keep rat poison in my house. One day I started having pain in my stomach. Doctors said it was IBS. I suffered from this pain for years and was always thirsty. My wife and I divorced, the pain stopped completely a month later after we split, and my thirst died down. I also discovered my rat poison box was nearly empty. Do the math. Wish I could have proven what she did to me. She is the type that likes to get attention or sympathy by any means necessary. She was having an affair with someone. After reviewing all the events that transpired, all of it led to that she was poisoning me. It fell in line roughly around the time she met this guy. But after we divorced, and the pain stops? Yes, she was doing something. If it was IBS or something, it would have been ongoing even after, but to just stop after we divorced, raises eyebrows. Sadly, none of this would stand in court. It is my word against hers, and the courts reasonably want hard proof. Hospital records, police reports, etc. Since we have a child together, if I tried to go after her with this, it would probably look bad on me, like I am trying to start trouble, and our judge is pro-family, and granted me with 50-50 custody. No child support or alimony. I don't want to risk that. If I knew what I knew now, I would have done something like get tested for poison and started recording her when I was at work to get evidence the courts would have needed. My ex-boyfriend basically choked me out 3 times in a row. He was on top of me and I was lying down face first on the bed. Literally choking me unconscious again as soon as I woke up. No matter how much I tried to scratch or bite at him, he would not loosen grip. He had my neck between his elbow and was pulling with his other hand, this all while having sex with me anally. We would have fights where he would grab me by the hair and say, "What should I do? Kill you?" Another was when he made a glance at a knife and then at me before trying to tackle my phone out of my hand. Luckily I called 999 just in time. I can safely say this guy was psychotic. The only way I escaped was by overdosing intentionally and having him call an ambulance. The doctors figured something was wrong and had to have him escorted out of the hospital. I knew what it took in order to not actually die, although I really felt that was it for me. He now cannot contact me or visit the country or he gets jail time. In a car with my ex-girlfriend, she was driving like a maniac. Literally going like 80 miles per hour in a 40 miles per hour zone, running red lights without even looking, straight up not caring. I had to yell at her to stop a lot of times before she came to her senses. Her excuse was that she didn't notice what she was doing. She was later diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. One of the symptoms for this condition is a feeling of dissociation, which sort of makes you feel like you're not in control of yourself. Woke up in the middle of the night as my psychopath stepson was standing over me watching me sleep. He was holding a large kitchen knife. He was institutionalized a few days later. He was in treatment since he was 3. And he went to the hospital that morning. He was 8. They admitted him, he was there 3 days, before being institutionalized, into a residential facility. So when I said he was institutionalized, a few days later, I was referring to his residential facility, not the hospital, which was immediate. It's a tough road for him for sure. Mental illness is horrible. Sadly, after his mom and I divorced, she moved out of state, and took him, of course, with her, and never got him back in treatment. He's 20 now, and destroying people around him regularly. He has a baby, who he does not support or see, under a year old, and I just spoke to his mom today. She's remarried, and we've always stayed friends, and he has another girl pregnant. He's never had a job for more than a few days, barely reads, was passed through high school, just to move him out of the school. Super sad. So, my apartment is in the shape of a U, and the carport is in the back, forming an O essentially. We had these neighbors who attracted bad energy, even though the matriarch was a sweetheart. She let a friend live with her for a few months, and her friend had a boyfriend who was diagnosed sociopathic. At one point he even threatened to shoot up her whole apartment because of this woman. Police were called, did nothing. If it did happen, We had a man who lived on the top edge of one side of the U who was a gun enthusiast, so guy would have gotten knocked out real quick. Anyway, there was a huge fight with him and his girlfriend at about 10 p.m. It was loud, but he left. 2 a.m. we get a loud knock saying one of the cars in the carport was on fire. It was spreading very fast. This idiot caught our carport on fire, in the attempt to make it spread to the apartments and lock us all in the O of the building. Everyone got out safe even though the entire row of cars were destroyed. The thing is, if we didn't have that one night owl neighbor, who just so happened to be outside at that moment, the fire would have spread without anyone knowing because it was quiet. And only one person called it in. Scariest day of my life. They know who the guy was, but they couldn't prove it. Guy threatens 25 plus people, some of which were literal newborns and elderly people, and attempts to kill them, and he doesn't get charged. It was messed up. This isn't as near death as some of the stories here, but it's still the most frightening night of my life. My parents had a bitter, volatile and violent divorce. My mom went absolutely off the rails during this time. It was no secret to anyone, I was a trap baby, and while my parents were married my mother never attempted to bond with me or form any relationship whatsoever, while I was the apple of my dad's eye. It had always been him and I, he was a single parent even while they were married. So when they got divorced I chose to live with my dad. He got primary custody while my mom got weekends and whatever else he would give her, and in turn he never asked for child support. During and after the divorce she was awful to me, berated and insulted me, trash-talked my dad any chance she got, and let her abusive, alcoholic and completely inappropriate boyfriend, Saturday night and with the family at her house meant he'd turn the lights off, light candles, and lie down while me and my stepsisters were required to give him a massage, essentially move in with her. Now that the stage is set, one weekend she came to pick me up for her custodial time. I begged my dad to let me stay and not make me go, but he told me it was court-ordered and I had to. When she picked me up the first words out of her mouth, with as much venom as she could spit to an 8-year-old, "You don't look very excited to see me. I wanted to stay with Dad. You're not very nice to me." Something in her snapped. She spent the next 30 minutes shrieking at me while driving 90 miles per hour down a 2-lane country highway known for its deadly accidents. She screamed up and down that she was just going to kill herself and drive her car off a cliff. I was in hysterics because I was also in the car and her response was, "Guess you'll go with me." It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I was begging her to not kill me, not kill herself, and just take us home. Eventually she calmed down like nothing ever happened and took me to her house. After that I never showed any unwillingness to go to her house because in my elementary schooler mind she would kill herself and me if I did. I never said anything to my dad because she said if I did she'd hang herself. I turned 30 this month and haven't talked to her in 2 of the best years of my life. This wasn't even my worst memory of her, and she still has no idea why I cut contact with her. As a kid growing up I had a neighbor who had some issues. She was my age, about 10 years old when this happened. She had invited me and one of her